Okay, we're ready to open the
Recording in progress.
We're ready to open the PACE meeting this evening. This hybrid meeting will be conducted both in person and remotely over Zoom. Attendance by members may be in person or remote, and both types of attendance shall count towards quorum. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded on ECAT. All votes will be by roll call, and all of these procedures are online for remote participation if you're interested in looking at those. So I think we'll start with roll call attendance with everyone. So Coyne,
Chris Kong here.
Cabral,
Cabral present.
Millette,
Millette present.
Souza,
Present.
Donahue present, Hamilton,
Present.
Reed,
Present.
Nightingale,
Nightingale present.
Mills,
Present.
Helen,
Present.
and online we have Byers.
Byers present.
Thank you. And Higgins
Higgins present.
and Fulgenetti.
I tried to promote her, she didn't come through. There she goes.
Fulgenetti.
Present.
Thank you. Okay, so the first order of business is the acceptance of the minutes from January 15th, January 29th, and February 26th. Everyone's had a chance to take a look at them. We'll take a motion to accept those.
Motion to accept minutes.
That was Mills and Helen. All in favor? I guess do I have to take a roll call for this?
Yes, so everything has to be roll call, sorry.
Okay. Chris? Cohen?
Aye.
Cabral, aye. Millette, aye.
Souza, aye.
Donahue, aye.
Hamilton, aye. Reed, aye.
Nightingale, aye.
Mills, aye.
Helen, aye.
Online, Higgins?
Higgins, aye.
Byers?
Byers, aye.
Fulgenetti?
Aye.
Thank you. So all in favor? Unanimous. Okay, and the next agenda item is an update on community engagement. And I thought we could just each go around and talk about events that we've attended, we've held, or things that we are planning in the future. You know, and if you want to say past, that's fine too, if you haven't had an opportunity to schedule anything or be in anything yet. Helen, Patrick, would you like to begin? Patrick?
Yes, I would, if I was listening. I was trying to figure out what I was doing with this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, it's about,
Any events that you've attended or that you've held or plan to hold for community engagement?
So we have an upcoming finance committee meeting that will be in person here next week. Hopefully we can get some attendees there. I'm going to put the word out for people that are curious about more of the deeper dive budget approval process. That's a great place to come. There's going to be an opportunity to obviously interact with a lot of people. You and I have done 2 sessions, if I remember, at the library. I went to one of those early morning Dunkin' Donuts sessions. I'm planning on actually continuing to attend to those if we're continuing those. I thought that was valuable. And then I'm up for anything else. I don't have anything planned myself, but willing to fit in where needed.
Thank you. Chris, anything you want to report?
I am scheduled to address the YMCA board at their next board meeting, which is the end of the month, I think.
Thank you. Excellent. Wendy, anything you want to report or you've attended?
No, I've been doing more behind the scenes stuff.
Thank you. Jim? I don't mean to skip you, but
I'm just working on the
doing your job.
Sorry.
Jim?
Yes, echoing what Patrick said, I'd be happy to join coffee hours if there are more, or if there are any on the weekends, I'd be happy to host them. Specifically though, I am on this Thursday, tomorrow, I will be at Night of the Arts at the Easton Middle School. And then Wednesday, April 2nd from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m., I will be at Bingo Night Spring at Blanchard's.
Oh, thank you. Excellent, and thank you too. I believe Jocelyn has helped us organize all of those events for the school, so thank you very much, along with Dr. Cabral's team getting us those dates and things, so we appreciate that. And Jim, there will be a coffee this Friday at 7 o'clock at the Dunkin' Donuts that's up on Washington Street, the plaza that Corfinio is in. So we'd love it if you could join us.
Yep.
We'll be there.
If you need any handouts or anything, let me know. We could print some stuff for you. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Anything, Marissa, you want to speak about?
Last Friday, 2 Fridays ago maybe, I was at the musical on Friday night and the boys basketball game. And then I was slated to be for the BA PTA meeting, but it happens to be the same night as another PACE meeting. So that one's not going to happen. And then I reached out to to Roche Brothers for a table on the weekends, and they took my contact information, but I've yet to call me, so I can reach back out to them to kind of see if there's any other availability.
Thank you. Kathy?
I haven't been into many, and then we got the plague this weekend because I said I'd be sick for this meeting, so karma came back for me. But happy to join any future.
Thank you very much. Chris, anything that you?
Yes, today, actually, I did one at Frothingham, an hour and a half, about 10 to 12 people. We covered many, many topics, and 3 areas of concern that I note that came from them. One is that they are concerned with the difference between the residential and commercial. They would like to see more commercial. I see that's on the agenda tonight anyhow. Also, they're concerned with the school cuts. There happen to be some retired teachers. They're concerned with the school cuts, and the group seemed to coalesce around the idea that the cuts for the school should not come from direct teachers, but other sources as well. And then the third one, there was a lot of concern about I guess I would call it the unintentional error that the town made, that we talked about the DPW building coming up so close onto the heels of the crisis, and so there's some.
I would politely push back that it was an unintentional error.
Well, it wasn't something, you didn't plan for the two to come together at the same time.
Well, no one.
Right.
No one plans for healthcare to go up 20% in 2 years.
Right.
I'm not trying to be defensive.
I
about
understand it. So unintentional means it's not a fault. It's just that it happened the way that you described it. And I think there's some concern within the general public discussing that issue as well. So it might be something that could be more easily clarified. I have to say, though, that the people that were there were probably as well informed about PACE as I was, which was really interesting. And so an explanation was given as to why it was, actually by one of the people there. So it was a good good conversation throughout the full of the afternoon. So it was 12 to about 1:45 that we talked about things within the town.
Thank you for
And there's
doing that.
another one coming up, I believe it's April 2nd, and then there's one on April 7th as well.
And one of them is actually to the Council on Aging, if I remember
Correct.
correctly. That one I might be able to attend with
Just
you.
make sure that I get the time right,
Okay,
because I can make errors.
I'll double check with you. One point of clarification, and then I also want to kind of throw it to Dr. Cabral, because I think she'd probably like to speak to one of the comments that you made, because I've heard her speak to that in the past. But when you say residential versus commercial, are you referring to tax rates or just the tax percentages in the town? I'm not sure what that means. Yes, you just said one of the concerns.
One of the
was-
concerns
yeah.
is you have the residential, and then you have the commercial, in that the residents cover, the tax levy from the residents is 88%, and the tax levy from the commercial industrial is 12%. And so it's been an ongoing thing within Easton to try to build up that commercial industrial. And I think that's something we talked about. I explained how actually this last year was one of the best years that we've had in the tax levy from the commercial industrial. And we talked about the different sites. And so they are also in like mind with, I believe that it's one of the things that's going to be coming up, which is the land use policy, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So they were supportive of this idea right here.
I don't know if there's anything you want to speak to that now, Connor, or just wait till we get to it in the...
Sure, Nancy. I think I understand your question as, was the distinction on splitting the tax rate more, or was it on
No.
encouraging more commercial
It was
growth?
encouraging more commercial and less residential. They did speak to not really wanting large, dense residents.
Okay, All right, thank you. And I don't know, Dr. Cabral, I was thinking of the comment that some folks are saying they would like to see layoffs that are not student-facing, and I didn't know if that was anything you wanted to address. When we had the other forum online, you had a response to that, and I didn't know if you wanted to echo that again.
Well, the cuts are so large that it will affect every area. It's impossible to cut millions of dollars and not affect every school, central materials, licenses. It's impossible, so it will be across the board.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris, for those comments too. Okay, does there anybody else want to, I asked you about the events, but is there any other, I love the way Chris shared the information from residents. Is there anybody else who wants to report? And Jen, welcome. We were just talking about events that you've attended or you plan to attend. I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on that at all.
I don't have any additional comments.
Okay. Is there anyone online who'd like to talk about things that they've attended or things that they plan to do?
I can comment. This is Jocelyn. I also covered the OA musical on Friday night and then again on Sunday. I mean, overall, and Denise was there as well, so you can, chime in with me if you'd like. It was definitely mixed feedback. I think that's normal. I was happy on Sunday. It was more of a family crowd than a student crowd compared to the evening. So I did have more traffic that day. And I think, some people said things like, I think we need it, but I don't think it's going to pass. I heard that a few times, almost like a defeated mentality. But then there were people that really stopped and read the posters and asked for a handout. So overall, I felt like it was worth our time to continue getting the word out.
Thank you. Any other comments from folks who are remote?
I can only tag on to Jocelyn. She and I did a similar night and then broke up. I did Saturday and she did Sunday, so we might have seen a different population. We tried to make the materials available and allow people to step up rather than being aggressive. And that seemed to just work well. At the basketball game, we attracted our opponents that spent a fair amount of time looking at our poster boards, not the intended
the people from
consequence.
Plymouth were really into it.
Yeah.
Well,
So
There you go.
Were they supportive?
They were like, oh, this is so interesting. So it was just funny. And I'm like, oh, here's a flyer. They're like, oh, no, I'm from Plymouth. Okay.
wearing an orange hat.
Yeah.
I will say I was at, I have met with or spoken with school committee chairs in some neighboring districts recently. We met at different events and attended the South Shore Roundtable legislative breakfast put together by the Mass Association of Superintendents. So Assistant Superintendent Pruitt and I attended that, and there were other districts that were aware of this committee and very complimentary of its formation and the work that has been done, and they are facing similar budget situations and are looking to our website for kind of a playbook or information on the approach that we're taking. So we got a lot of positive feedback from people, and I did not expect that, but there were folks who were like, oh, Easton, you've got that PASE thing going on. So that was interesting. And then I met somebody there who is an administrator in another district who had recently moved to Easton, and she said that everybody in her neighborhood was talking about potential override. So it's good to hear that people are talking to their neighbors and word is getting out and awareness is building.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent.
did they mention a favorite? committee member.
You, of course, like that guy, Patrick.
The big moron, yeah.
And I also
wanna
just
check.
want to say a special thanks to Jocelyn and Denise. I saw the picture of the setup that they had at the schools. I don't know if anybody else saw that, but with the "Did you know" posters and the information, and everything, it really looked very welcoming and informative. So thank you for being there. And we just need to keep it up. So as we continue to schedule things, let's make sure that we get the notification of that out. So if you'd send that to me and to Tom, we'll make sure that at least gets on the PACE website, the town crier, different places. I'm starting to hear people talk about potential things that they want to have at their home, even outside this committee, to invite friends. And, you know, sometimes those grocery store conversations, soccer field conversations are some of the best things that you can do. So thank you for keeping up the engagement. Okay, the next thing is really the meat of our work for this evening, which is the agenda item that says deliberate, finalize, and vote to adopt all outstanding recommendations required by the PACE committee charge. This is sort of the ultimate, the pinnacle of our charge, getting through this. And of course, the big thing that we have this evening to talk about is the community compact. If you need a copy of that, there are some copies over here, although I did email everyone this afternoon. And for folks online, Connor, did that
I'll get
get
it. I'll
posted
pass it
to
up.
the PACE
Yes,
website?
it's on the committee's website under meeting materials as a draft.
Good.
If anyone is watching the Zoom who's not on the committee, you can follow along. It's at
We have handouts.
www.easton.ma.us/PACE, P-A-S-E,
You have one.
and click meeting materials.
So thank you. So if you'd like to follow along, that's available
Connor
online
has
as
one,
well.
Wendy has one.
And I thought the best way to go through this
Actually,
might
I
be
got
sort
it
of
on.
Get it there?
Yeah.
You want?
sort of section by section, and for folks to have input, our three committee members online as well. And then I also have sort of a list of things that I have heard in the work that I will bring up if it doesn't come up. And I just want to remind folks who are listening for the first time, this was a decision that we made at the last PACE meeting that I would start to put this together with assistance from Jim Hamilton and from Marissa Souza. And I just thank you so much to both of them. Amazing work that they did to help put this together. And then that was really the content of the document. And then in order to have some technical review to make sure that it was run by the departments, Connor and Leisha gave it an overview as well. So still a lot to talk about. This is a draft for discussion purposes, but we hope that at least it has the things in front of us that will allow us to deliberate and talk about that. So in the first paragraph or two is really just an opening about the compact. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that. You know, the following outlines the Community Pledge Compact. Is there anything in that first paragraph or two that anyone wants to talk about?
I guess the only question is that the wording of this means that any of these boards, committees, et cetera, can raise the potential. The final piece, this might just be municipalese, but others as appropriate. That seems very broad to me. But I rely on the municipal experts to say that that's just expected language.
Any concern about that?
So how I would read that, it says subject to review at a request of the signatory boards, and at the end it's asking PACE, Finance Committee, Select Board, and School Committee to be the signatory. So I think that's who that is. But I think, Patrick, the point you're making is then it lists other bodies that are not signatories to this. So we could clean it up, or you could just say the signatory boards at the end of the
I think
commitment.
it's probably a better move, yeah.
I thought his comment was getting rid of the "and others" as appropriate. Did I misunderstand?
I just don't know if that's too vague. I don't want to get really pedantic, but if that's too vague and then we have someone that's,
Right.
I don't know, I'll pick one at random, right? Conservation Committee goes, I think, based on X, we should reopen this. Does that immediately facilitate a reopen? Or is there additional extenuating circumstances that have to go through that?
Jen, you had a comment?
Yeah, so one, it's Finance Committee, just a typo there.
Thank you.
But the PACE Committee, so the PACE Committee will be the signatory. Will that committee exist in the future as is? So if this is requiring that all signatory boards and
good point.
unions must request reopening this if one of those boards does not exist in the future? Does that nullify the ability to reopen that?
So
Should
maybe
it
it's-
just be select school and finance committee?
So I think you could do that, or if, because I know some drafts that kicked around, some feedback from some folks was, does PACE exist again in some form? And I mean, depending on, what it is that precipitates this, right? So there's been folks who have flagged, what if there's a catastrophic recession, or what if there's major federal revenue cuts that just completely fundamentally change the operating budget? What's the mechanism for getting folks back together? So you could either have those 3 policy boards, which of course are directly elected, or you could add a little rider there that says those boards could reseat PACE if they felt appropriate, right? Kind of call you all back.
I guess is it important that we say it might be subject to review at the request of all? Is that
That's-
all an
that's-
important
I didn't
word, or
see
should
the
it
other-
be,
yes,
should it
yeah,
be
it's-
any? Does that get
That's
to-
sort of my other side of it, is that if you have any, I'm playing devil's advocate against
Right.
myself. If you have all, it might be too high of a bridge to open the discussion. If you have any, then some other board can come in and be like, you know what? I like that PACE committee. Let's get those guys going again. Like that's
So why don't you just remove all, have signatory boards,
yeah.
including the 3 elected boards that are being requested to sign this. I think perhaps at the end, Nancy, because again, some folks had weighed in on, annual accountability as far as messaging, or does PACE ever exist again? Perhaps that's an opportunity, but the groups that will be responsible for shepherding this into the future are going to be those 3 boards and the administration of the town and schools who work for the school committee and the select board.
So maybe this compact may be subject to review at the request of signatory boards and unions, including but not limited to the select board, school committee, finance committee, and planning and zoning board, period.
Well, the planning and zoning board's not a signatory on this.
Yeah, so we just
Okay.
Yeah, I would
Signatory.
we leave it to the 3 signatory
The 3
boards.
elected
Yeah,
boards.
And the,
Okay.
and the
Maybe
unions.
just at the
Get that
request
off
of
there.
the
These
select
3.
board, school committee, and finance committee.
Okay. How about the unions? Do you want to get those out of there too? Just the signatory boards?
Well, we happen to have multiple unions represented on PACE. The only union that actually has a formal carved out seat is VEEA. So that, to me, then asks the question of, do you bring PACE back? So I open to what other folks think.
Or just leave it simply at the request of either the select board, the school committee, or the finance committee? Does that get to what we're talking about?
Could you treat it just like how we treat the PEC committee? If need be, you could reconvene?
You mean PACE?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the select board and the school committee ultimately adopted the charge. They could reappoint PACE if you all want to come back.
By Wednesdays will feel empty for them.
I'm just trying to make it cleaner, that's all.
I mean, I think some of this too is the first part of that makes clear this is due to unforeseen things like major emergencies or economic crises. This is not like
Someone feels like
Small
it's-
requests, right.
to move some.
So maybe we just leave it at the signatory boards and list those 3, and that is it. Does that satisfy everybody?
I think and unions might not be a bad thing to include.
Excuse me, Jim, I didn't
To
hear.
keep the unions in might not be a bad idea.
Okay.
But, or put it as an or.
How does that work, like process-wise?
Yeah, who
Right,
does
because
the
these
union
boards would
go
have to meet publicly to debate it, and those folks could participate.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but like mechanically, if the unions are not a signatory to the document, and these boards are, like, I don't know, I'll ask the EEA and fire union folks here, like, what would that look like?
If you're gonna have one union, you're gonna have a representative from all.
Right.
Or, so it's gotta be all the
But
unions
they're
or
open to the
none.
public, so people can go.
They are, yeah. I mean, we
So-
wouldn't be able to debate this privately.
Yeah, so I feel like
Right.
it's almost excessive, right? Because if you're doing it with those signatory boards, and it's in a public space, anybody is allowed to show up to be a part of the process.
Yeah, I agree. I also think to Connor's earlier point, like this is not, hey guys, our Wednesdays are open, let's reopen some stuff, right? This is, there's a meteor has hit. We have extenuating circumstances, right? There's gonna be some clear and critical aspects to it. The signatory boards are gonna be the ones that, for the most part, have the first cut of responsibility for those discussions. I think that's, but I'm not on a union, so I don't want to speak for the union side, but if you have a stronger opinion of it, then I can see a point of including it, because there might be something that a union would raise and say, hey, this is an extenuating circumstance. But I can see that as being raised at one of these.
Yeah, who would
other
they raise
boards.
that to?
Right.
One of the
Could you go
signatory
to a
boards.
select board meeting? Could you go to a FinCom meeting? Please God, we have no one attends. Come. And then raise that in that conversation, and that would be the kickoff for those boards to start something like a petition association.
You could put in there a requirement that any review be done as a public hearing and not a meeting, because there's a distinction, right? Under open meeting law, a meeting, you don't technically have to allow comment. A hearing, you do. So hearings, you have to allow testimony. So that would safeguard and
Ensure they have a voice.
Yeah.
if they wanted to go, yeah.
Yeah, I think
I think
to
that's the
have a
important
voice
part.
is to make sure that you're being heard,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that there's
You-
not
you
like
could-
a cap or anything on it, like.
You get,
Yeah, if we don't put as an agenda item community comments, then you are not allowed to speak.
Right, then you can't.
yeah. So you could say
Okay.
provided, however, that is subject to review at request, provided said review must be at a public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, does that satisfy everybody?
I,
Yep, Chris?
for specificity, should it say Town of Easton boards as opposed to just boards?
Can you tell me where you are? Sorry.
We're right after signatory. It says all signatory boards.
Well, we're going to change it to just request of signatory boards, select board, school committee,
Boards
and
of the Town
finance
of
committee.
Easton, or just boards in general?
Well, I think it's listing those boards.
It's listing those boards, which are the same boards that are the signatories on the back of the
You know,
document.
belt and suspenders. Does it hurt to put Town of Easton boards? Just for specificity?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Town of Easton signatory board, so we don't have to put it 3 times.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Anything else on that top section? Okay. The next section, no debt exclusion and no operational override for a set number of years. And there's a 5 in there right now. Actually, I should have left that as XX, but maybe this is a good time to talk about the results of 16 folks who weighed in on this number of years. And we came to a value of 4.4 years. That doesn't mean we have to accept that. 4.4 years that we have to accept that arithmetic average. But just so you get a sense of where people are chiming in. And the other issue that was raised is, should both of those be in the same paragraph, the debt exclusion and the operational override? Should they be the same, or is there an opportunity for those to be separate? So the 5 really should not be there. I would suggest that if 4.4 is the number and we do choose the arithmetic average, we'd go back and round to 4, but that is also up for PACE discussions.
When you say not in the same paragraph, do you mean not a blanket statement of both of them at
Not
5
have the
years?
same number,
Got it,
right?
got it,
Not,
got it.
could be in the same paragraph, but not have the same number, not be subject to the same number.
Got it.
Could it be the number 3 for one of them and the number 5 for the other one? And that was just raised, so I thought I would throw it out here. Don't know if anybody has any comment on that.
If I can just ask Connor and Leisha their comfort, I feel like from the school standpoint, we're not planning on anything.
Okay, sorry about that.
So I'd like to just get Dr. Cabral and Connor's feedback on this. I feel like from the school side, we've made significant investments, and I think that I hope we're good for the next 5 years, but I don't want to make that assumption if there's any awareness or risk there. And then on the town side as well, again, I know we're making a huge investment on the municipal building, but is there anything else that you feel would be at significant risk if we were to commit to this for 5 years for debt exclusion?
You first.
As of right now, I have no knowledge of upcoming needs.
Yep.
I absolutely never know if
Right.
something's going to happen, but as of this moment, there is nothing that I am aware of as a significant upcoming capital building need.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So on the town side, and Chris, the feedback about the municipal debt exclusion, thankfully, because that was approved, between that and some in-house renovations and CPA renovations to town hall, 94% of municipal buildings will have been renovated or replaced in a 5-year window, which is fantastic. But that leaves Frothingham Hall. That's the other 6%. Frothingham Hall was built in 1912. There are folks.
Good though. It looks good though.
We've tried to stretch as much as we have with all of our buildings, and the schools have before they were replaced. We've tried to stretch as much life as we can out of Frothingham Hall using grants and other things, but we have heard feedback from folks, users of Frothingham Hall, that they would really hope to see a new or improved community center. That said, I understand this exercise. So we don't have an active plan for a debt exclusion for a community center. I had last year earmarked the potential for early feasibility funding in the capital plan for a community center. The capital budget's going to be stripped back pretty significantly this May for reasons I'm sure everyone in this committee appreciates. So that is, I don't mean to give like a word salad answer. I just don't want folks who use Frothingham Hall to not hear me say that is something we do very regularly hear from folks, right? Because I think if you're a senior who's using that facility, you can kind of at this point credibly look and say, well, the school campus has been brought into pretty excellent shape. Now all the municipal and public safety and public works are going to be in good shape, and then the community center is really the last piece. That being said, a debt exclusion is different than not doing a debt exclusion for a certain number of years doesn't mean we couldn't look for opportunities for renovation and expansion if it fit within the operating budget, the normal capital. So, especially as we offline the existing DPW and police and fire facilities, there could be some opportunities there, but we would not be able to do a new community center without an exclusion. So I understand the activity. I don't want folks to feel like I didn't flag that. I still think that makes sense to make a pledge for a certain amount of years. I just don't want people to walk out of a room later and then have somebody come to them at the next round of hall thing and say, wait a minute, every other thing got replaced and not this. So that's just worth people thinking about. So Jen, I appreciate the question.
Thank you. So are we satisfied making this the same number, or do we want to carve them out to be different? Does anybody have any?
The only thing I would ask is that would we have to go back? I don't think we have to, but would it make sense to go back and do another round of voting for if people wanted two different numbers? Right, if someone said, like for instance, I'll use me as the example, I thought 5 years, great, 5 years across the board. I think that lands well within potentially the deeper understanding some people in town might have, the nuance of what the difference between a debt exclusion and override might be lost on some. 5 years of a moratorium of anything, to me, sounded reasonable with the caveats that are in here. I don't know that carving out and saying, asterisk in these scenarios for this one and then in these scenarios for this one, I don't know if that serves us as well.
Thank you. My vote would have been the same for both, but you raise a good point, Patrick. Would it then be appropriate to have to go out and solicit everybody for the two separate things?
So I did agree, and I wasn't thinking of different numbers, but I think to the feedback Chris brought up and that we've heard, there's clearly a sensitivity, right, in town that we've had to debt exclusions. Often that conversation leaves out that we did try to have an operating override first. So I do think people think of them differently. Yeah. And when you think about a debt exclusion, There are things short of that where you could do it if it fits in your capital budget and make repairs. Whereas when you're at a point seeking an operating override, you're against the wall, right? So I don't think it would be illogical for the group to say, well, 3 for operating and 5 for debt, or 4 for 1 and 5, just given the sensitivity some folks have brought up with debt exclusions. But again, I'm happy to kind of go with the group. In the interest of not wanting to overpromise, I think as we all looked at that 5-year forecast, I think trying to get all the way through 5 years is functionally guaranteeing some pretty major service cuts towards the end of that.
On the operational side.
Yeah, so I would probably say 4, and I think even 4 will be hard, because the thing that's going to, even if we agree to operating budget caps, which a lot of other communities have, if healthcare keeps going up 10% a year, we're going to run into trouble. And that doesn't mean, okay, so we just don't try. I just think 5 might be aggressive, but again, I think we should have everyone kind of weigh in. And
Jim?
Yeah, I did actually advocate for 2 different numbers. I think somewhat similar to your thought process, where I feel like an operational override could be more urgent and necessary in a sooner timeline, whereas a debt exclusion, I don't have all the numbers of like how urgent repairs or renovations might be or new buildings might be, but could be kicked out a little bit farther if we're in a true financial crisis and we're talking about cutting staff and what I would consider essential personnel over a community center or other things. And I know that the debt exclusion could be used for a lot of other things, but I kicked it closer to like 8 years for a debt exclusion, and more like 4 to 5 years for an operational override. And for what it's worth, for everyone who might not be reading, there are ways to present a debt exclusion or an operational override earlier. So this is not binding no matter what we say, no matter how this is voted on.
No, thank you, Jim.
yeah, and I think that's a good point. And that first exemption is actually carved straight out of state law, right? Voters, if they can petition for an article at a special town meeting with 100 signatures already. So I think that's kind of just acknowledging that, all of these huge choices ultimately are for voters to make. And so if, 100 folks want to petition a town meeting to debate it, then they would have that opportunity.
Good point. It's still in the voters' hands to a very, very large degree.
It always is.
It is. It always is.
Regarding those 4 points, can I ask just a clarifying question on 3, which I don't fully understand? I get it, but I don't get it. Like the administrative consent orders, I don't know what those are, which might be a failure on my part. But effectively, if I'm understanding it, there's something coming down from a higher authority, a state level authority, or something to that effect that's requiring this type of spending. That would be that.
Yes. So an example would be if you have a wastewater plant that goes into some kind of failure and is discharging sewerage into areas where it shouldn't go. The DEP or some other agency could issue an administrative consent order or decree that says you have this much time to get this fixed, and it's not our responsibility to care about how. It's your job to do it.
It's the truth.
So we haven't. At least in my tenure, that hasn't been a thing. But I don't know. Felt it was worth flagging.
Well, thank you. That's
No, I
good.
like it. Yeah, I just didn't.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on this separate number for debt and operational override?
I'm kind of split in that I do think it should be like one consistent number. I think that's easier to kind of digest, but I also feel like we can go further for like the debt exclusion. And I feel like a lot of the feedback I have gotten is that it's on the heels of the last debt exclusion. So I think if we were able to kind of remove that out of the running for a little bit, not that we're totally removing it, because there's, like you said, there's ways to go about it if it's a necessity and we need to. That's where I think it's our way of saying we're hearing the public as to what their concerns are.
Thank you. Anyone else here? Wendy?
Well, I'm just more conservative, so I mean, for me, it would be 3 years operating, 5 years debt exclusion. And that isn't to say that we would be looking to have an override in 3 years. It's just, given the uncertainty of fixed costs and the escalation on those in the coming years, they don't look like they're gonna go down anytime soon. So that's why I would go with 3 years and 5 years for debt exclusion.
I would look at the 5 years as a promise. We're promising you that if you vote for this, we won't look for one in 5 years. Although the next thing down says all 100 people have to do is to petition, right? And then it's got to go to town meeting, right? Yes?
Yeah,
And
it
so,
would be debated at town meeting.
so there's an out for the 5 years, I understand that. But the wording itself is a promise to the town, that we are going to try our best to get through 5 years. And I'm not sure, with the information we received, that we could make 5 years. And so I think 3 is a better promise. And if you succeed 3, if you're through with 3, then 4 and 5 is no problem, right? So
So are you suggesting 3 for the operational and 5 for debt, or keeping them both 3?
I'm both 3,
Both
because that's the promise you're making to the people of Easton. We promise that this is what we're really going to try to do. But we've left ourselves this back door here, which is very convenient. So all I have to do is get 100 people and we can do an override anyhow.
To be clear, it would put it in front of a town meeting, but
Right.
town meeting could debate it, but it would still then have to pass town meeting, go back to the select board, call an election,
Right.
have
No,
voters approve it.
I understand, but
Yeah.
it's just the promise part that I'm focusing on.
No, I hear you. It's just for folks who might be listening at home.
Right.
I'm not trying to be, such a lawyer without a law degree about the precision of the language. But when we say we're giving ourselves a back door, like we're acknowledging state law.
I'm being the compassionate one. this
Fair
time.
enough.
Jen?
I agree with Chris and Wendy. When we were looking through those projections, using any reasonable estimates that were based on, past history, et cetera, we were running into trouble in years 4 and 5, and I would not be comfortable making that promise that we wouldn't have to go back. I know 5 is extremely appealing. It's a nice number. I definitely see the appeal of it. I think from it being fully transparent to voters, I think I would be confident saying we're good with 3 years.
And for both again?
Yeah, and actually for debt, I would be comfortable going higher. I would go 5 years for debt. It sounds like it's what we're hearing, that we could eke out 5 years on debt. But on the operating part, I think reality is that we would be having very difficult conversations again in years 4 and 5 and looking at reductions in services and staff. And I wouldn't want voters to then wonder, well, then why did you say we'd be good for 5 years if you looked at a bunch of projections that said you were in trouble after year 3? So
Thank you. Chris, did you want to
Yeah.
weigh in?
I just want to word this correctly. Given the volatility of how I have perceived the public, how they feel about even going to the table for an override, saying that we're not going to go for an operational override in only 3 years it makes no sense to me at all. We haven't done an operational override in almost 20. That's not a good thing either, but we've done it, we've stretched it, got creative and everything like that. This, where we are now, if we as a group are saying that we can't sustain for more than 3 years, then why did we only say 7.3 million? Why didn't we say 8 million? Or, you know what I mean? Everyone got a chance to put a number in. So to me, and again, I'm not trying to be disagreeable, I'm just trying to be a realist. Going to town meeting with a logical sheet like this and saying, we promise we won't come back for 3 years for something like that, it just doesn't make sense to me. And what doesn't make sense is, okay, so then why did we only do 7.3 million? Why didn't we just do 8 million? Not that 700,000 is going to stretch us another 2 years or anything like that, but
I mean, it might.
hey, I'm the one that said 8,
But isn't the answer to that because there is a sensitivity to the tax impact?
Right, but the sensitivity of the tax impact, if we go back to them for 3 years for another operational override, where's the sensitivity there? Let's go full gangster and do it now. I know what I'm gonna hear tomorrow from people that are watching this thing, and I'm just trying to put a little reality in there, and I'm sorry if I'm doing a terrible job at it, but I think the town can't expect anybody to forecast what things are going to be like next year, tomorrow. Tomorrow something could happen. This is an incredibly sensitive act of goodwill, which I do support the act of it, but it just doesn't make sense to me that if we're only going to limit it to 3 years, then why aren't we just trying to do more money now? That's just me.
I'll let you, Connor, do you want to speak first?
I
Oh,
was just
thank you.
kind of piggyback off of that. I think it's like the optics perspective.
Yeah,
It's
that's-
like how it's going to, because I kind of agree with what you're saying here is if there is such a pushback already with the amount that we're asking, to come back in 3 years seems like it's a hard pill to swallow. But the one thing I take hope in is that it's also contingent on a lot of these other things we have in here being done to help offset a potential need for another override. So I think, to play devil's advocate, I kind of agree that 3 seems a little bit small to come back and ask, like in the sense that I would be hesitant to ask for more money in 3 years. But if we continue to do the other things that we are promising here, there's a chance that we can get more revenue that's not just from a tax base.
You make a good point, and to play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate, do we think that some of the outlined pieces in here are accomplishable in a 3-year time frame? Like maybe you just made me think of it like, is that a deeper look at this? I might be simplifying it too much, but we've been trying to do more economic development, and Chris brought up like the idea of having more of that tax base on the other side. Like that has been something we've been trying to do for more than 3 years, right? Is that something that we'll have established something and have things running towards? So yeah, I concur. I think that's definitely something that I hadn't considered the rest of the pieces here in that number, but that's a really good point.
So I think an important caveat there is that the most impactful things that are going to free up the capacity for the market to do its thing and grow are going to have to go back through town meeting, right? They're not things like I can't change zoning from my office, right?
No.
And I can't change wetland rules from my office. And so there is a very real scenario here where, and that's why we're talking about tonight, it's a good discussion of trying to balance. You don't want to say, oh, we want to ask for an override for 18 months. But could we make it 5 years if growth took off like a rocket and we dramatically deregulated? Yeah, probably. And if healthcare didn't go up 10% a year. But that would require for vote, we've been, and I'm not denigrating, the electorate, but upzoning, rolling back environmental regs is not something that can be taken for granted by this committee, right? And just playing out the timeline, realistically, any major regulatory reform, if PASE makes its recommendation, is not happening until May 2026, right? So then, Chris, you work in construction. Regulations change May 2026. Design and construction aggressively and permitting, 18 months? So you're now in near Thanksgiving 2027, which is fiscal year 28, before any growth attributable to a major regulatory change by town meeting could be happening. And that assumes that there's no massive recession or things like that. So I think that that's not to say this is for naught. And Patrick, to your point, we've been trying certain things. I think that's part of the responsibility that's going to be on PACE and its members after this work is done, is that when the planning board is trying to do its job, and you're all laughing like that, I'm going to bring you back, I think, but if the planning board is trying to do their work to look at zoning, typically, and I'll make it, it's not about Easton, but typically when planning boards in Massachusetts are doing upzoning, and Chris, you were on one, it's usually not folks coming in to say,
Can't wait.
thank
They
you.
never say.
So excited.
So it's, we have to do those things, but they could take a while to
Bear fruit.
bear fruit. And we've seen some of that positive already, right? Growth now is on a really good trajectory. But I'm not trying to be the wet blanket here, but I don't want folks to think that, if we advance design of the sewer of the industrial park this spring, that means you're going to have multi-million-dollar growth in a year or two. It's going to take it takes a couple years to build that infrastructure. Regulatory reform takes time, and it takes voters approving it. So, but I hear your point as well, Chris. Right? Somebody could say, well, you've gone 19 years without an override. Why can't you say more than 3? I think the real hard thing about this whole situation we're in is that the paradigm we're operating in has fundamentally changed. But
And also, you have to have businesses that want to come to Easton. That's it. You can zone it
Place rules.
however you want. Doesn't mean that people are going to want to buy and develop in Easton.
well, right, a lot of that goes to broader macroeconomic things we have no
Yes.
control over. Where are interest rates? What's going on with
Yeah.
the economy? That doesn't mean you don't try to lay the groundwork there so people can
Right.
take advantage of it. But if we have an economic downturn that lasts 18 months, I mean, there goes
All the progress.
by the time people start putting shovels in the ground again, you're in year 4 before you're capitalizing on that growth. So that's, I'm not saying therefore it can't be 5 years. I'm just saying that's something that we're trying to find.
How about just strike this whole section? I mean, it's just, I don't mean to
Strike the whole
just not
override.
put a date on it. I mean, at the end of the day, people can organize and come back if there's a need or something like that. You know what I mean? Rather than debate whether we should do 3 years, 5 years, or whatever, pull it out.
Well, I'll just remind you that it was this committee that overwhelmingly voted this as one of the major.
I understand that, but that was
So-
before this committee discussed it. So that's the only reason why I'm just,
So isn't the sensitivity though, the folks who would ask you, why didn't you ask for a larger number so you could get to year 5? Because you're right, there's always a provision, voters can organize, people can petition a town meeting, but isn't the sensitivity to the perception that it's somehow, the town, capital T, pushing these things rather than, so I don't
understand what you mean, sorry.
So people say, oh, well, the town did this building project. Like, well, the voters have to approve all of
Right,
these things, right? So doesn't this just communicate that the elected leadership
Skin in the game.
isn't going to go out of their way to say, hey, it's year 2, here you go?
I agree 1,000%.
I feel like it puts
But-
the onus on the people who want to pay more taxes or feel the need to pay more taxes
To open it up.
change the timeline. Like they have to go get signatures and have an effort and have a good reason.
Chris, what were you was going to say, and then Patrick's next.
Oh, no, I agree. I don't think people are going to view it the way we are viewing it, and that is my whole point. That's all.
I'm being a bad Zoom person. We have 2 hand raised online.
From our committee members on Zoom?
Yes.
Just think, can you tell me who they are?
Denise and Jocelyn.
Denise, can you comment, please? I was just going to get to them when we finished here.
Sure, yeah. I think to take it out just alienates the PACE intent in that we have spent an innumerable amount of time talking about how sustainable and to what period of time and our projections. I think that people will bite on this apple if we give them some reasonableness that, our intentions are good, albeit that we can't predict the future. So I just really think to take it out is kind of a mistake on our part.
Thank you.
It's a hard enough situation for a lot of people to grasp that planning their future as well. This gives them a little bit of time. In terms of the number, I think that there's a clear reason why the number 4 was popular with people. I think 3 is too little and 5 is too great. And I think that 4 became very popular with most of us. I'm not flip about the number, but I'm just saying that I believe that perhaps we can eke to 3. Eke to 4, getting past 3, and 5 is almost too far in the future.
So you're suggesting
That-
4 for both, Denise?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Jocelyn?
Yeah, this is a really interesting conversation because I just want to say I completely understand what Chris is saying. I almost feel like if you include the section, if you say we won't ask again in 3 years or 4 years, it sounds like we will be asking again in 3 years or 4 years. I think that's how it could be heard. And to your point, I mean, we haven't even had one for 20 years. But I also completely understand the argument to include it. So I just wanted to say I understand, Chris, what you're saying, and I do wonder if people. I mean, when I read that, I might think, okay, so there's going to be another one in 3 years then.
Thank you. Wendy?
I agree with that, and I would just recommend that we change the language a little bit to just say for at least 3 years or 5 years.
Yeah, if we could soften it,
Yeah.
rework it, something. It just,
So for a period of at least.
And are we sticking with the same or different? I heard the most common things I heard for different numbers were 3 override 5, 3 operational 5 debt. That's the most common difference, or I also heard a couple of votes for 4, keeping it 4.
I think you got to go back out. I think you just send a vote back out if it's. Does this have to be done?
We're looking to finalize
Yeah.
tonight, right?
Does this have to be done
I think
tonight?
it has to be done
Yes, it has to be
tonight.
done.
Yeah.
Oh, could I put Chris back on the spot? So, does 4 do it, or is there something?
No, great point. Is one of those better for your
You
thoughts?
said 3 is not valuable. I don't know if that meant 5, therefore is, and does it logically follow that 4 is okay?
I'm a 5-5, but that's me, and I know I'm going to be in the gross minority. I'm trying to get the override. I believe in everything that I've said here, and I truly believe that I am passionate about we need an override. I'm trying to get this to look as honest, as good as possible to get it through this year. And it's just 3 years is just not, it's just like I said, to me, it's like, my mother grounding me for a week. And on that last day, I can't wait to just get back out there and do whatever. And it's the same thing, like, it's been 3 years. Okay, let's organize again and push one through. So it's literally an optics thing. I know it's a stretch. I wish it would be feasible to go for more, but we have to keep things affordable. I understand all of it. I just, from an optics standpoint, that is how I feel. But I'm just one person.
Is a compromise, Chris, for at least 4 years for operational override and 5 years for debt? Is that helpful?
Sure, anything's better than 3.
Yeah.
It's 20.
20. Anybody?
Yeah, I
Comfortable with
I can
that.
I
You're
can
comfortable
I
with
can get on board.
at least a period of, that's great language to include, 4 years for an operational override, 5 years for a debt override with these caveats that 100 folks can bring it
Yeah.
forward. Patrick, were you going to say something else?
I like the way Chris phrased it early on, that this is a promise to the town. I think that's a key way of sort of putting it out there, right? Like, this is something that we're saying. We're pledging to not, absent, number one, incredibly extenuating circumstances, to come back to you to ask for this. Because we know that this is very important, it's impactful, various other adjectives. The end result is we are going to not do this for at least, that's the promise. I think 4 and 5, 4 and 6, like that type of scale is great. Like it provides, to Connor's point, it's the big T town isn't coming back every 3 years on a revolving basis to knock on the door, right? There are ways to request this. I think Jim was the one that said, like, if the people in town that are like, what I don't pay enough of,
I'd really like to pay more taxes.
I'm going to start a petition. That gives it out. It gives a possibility, but the possibility is that we're not coming back unless it is dire. And here's the definition of dire.
Okay, 4 and 5, is everybody comfortable? As comfortable as can be. Is that a compromise? Anybody else want to speak on that? And with the language, at least a period. Anybody online? Patrick raising their hand to
Anybody
weigh
online?
in?
Thoughts, comments, unmuting?
I'm good with that.
I like 4 and 4, but I could be okay with that.
Could I just make sure we clarify? So when we say 4 years, right? We're saying fiscal 26, 7, 8, 9, meaning the at least would end for fiscal 30, which is year 5 in our models. I think, is that fine?
4 fiscal years starting
Fiscal
post
26
Fiscal year 29.
is the 4th year, which means you wouldn't seek one for fiscal 29.
Right.
It would be for fiscal 30.
But fiscal 29 starts July 1st, 2028.
Yes.
That's how that works. So
Yes.
then going into,
Yeah, you were going to seek one for fiscal 30, you would be doing it in calendar year 29. Right?
PASE 2.
electric boat.
Yes, that
Okay.
math makes sense to me.
So
Yeah, I'm putting it on the.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything else in that section, the caveats 1 through 4, that anyone wants to talk about? Again, we'll keep the section together, but carve out the differences and change the language in those 2 years. With those 2 years. Is there anything else in that section? Okay, hearing none. Growth Advisory Committee, Section 2. One of the biggest comments most received there is this a new Growth Advisory Committee, or are we putting back the charge for some of these specific changes in policies and practices to the committees that they would be a part of now? So one thing to think about as we get into these land use and infrastructure policy changes. Any comments on that?
So I was a little confused by the language in the opening sentence. So to address the competing priorities of providing quality services, yes. Minimizing tax increases, yes. I'm stuck on this phrase, limiting housing and economic development growth. Is that a priority, and for whom?
So limiting housing and limiting
Was it
economic
supposed to be
growth.
limited?
The fact that we have
Oh,
limited.
yeah.
Yep, that makes
Limited.
sense.
Okay.
Thank you. Does that,
Very important catch.
yes. We want to limit housing.
Right,
to address
yeah,
the
okay,
competing
yeah, that
priorities.
seemed at odds with,
The fact that there is limited housing.
yeah,
economic
something like
development.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that help, Jen, or is there anything
Yes.
else? Okay, thank
Yep.
you for that catch. You are a great editor.
Seriously.
She's caught 2 really excellent things already.
But shouldn't there be something before the limited, because of, or something that
Okay, to address.
Yeah,
the
due
competing
to.
policies.
due to,
Yeah.
or as,
Address the competing.
because
policies.
this exists, or?
Priorities of providing quality services and
Due to limited housing.
Well, not due to
So
there. that
is
would
is
make
what
sense.
this is trying to say that we want to minimize tax increases by spreading the tax base out by encouraging economic and housing growth so we can support service.
Boy, that sounds really good.
Okay.
You should run for it.
Because this is confusing.
Okay, and then go to the comma, the town will establish a growth advisory committee.
like that.
Okay. Are you typing that, Connor? Do you want to repeat it? If you just repeat it, I will write it, but I didn't, I didn't know if you were noodling or were laying out a.
Connor, spit wisdom again. Go.
Really, it's recorded.
That is true.
I will figure it out.
All right, don't worry. Okay. No, so we're going to change the language a little bit there in that first sentences.
So this is a new committee?
Well,
That,
it's up for discussion.
there was, proposed it, but I think the growth of the number of committees is a concern. I think the draft language says there would be a new committee and/or could coordinate with existing committees to develop pro-growth policies.
I don't know if there, I just don't know, is there already a growth advisory committee?
No.
No. There's an economic development council that's more focused on trying to kind of market and attract folks and highlight business. And I think this was one of those areas that folks had some good feedback on. And I don't necessarily feel strongly one way or another. I am sensitive to creating more committees, but I also can appreciate, I suppose if there was going to be something like this, I would request that there be seats carved out on it for folks who are on the actual regulatory boards, right? Because those folks ultimately are going to be responsible for their work on behalf of the public. So, you know, things like the planning board or the conservation commission. I think a growth committee is fine. If you don't have the boards that actually administer those regs there, then I think that would be a missed opportunity. And a disservice to the work those folks have to do.
Don't we spell it out in the key areas of focus? Is that what you're speaking to? There's boards identified because there is a sentence in this opener.
Identified in the second section.
Yeah, there's a sentence in the opener that's like all boards and committees involved, which I was like, wait a minute, am I on this committee now all of a sudden? And then I got to 2 and I was like, oh yeah, okay, here they are, right? These are the associated committees included.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to pretty heavily focus on land use,
Right.
right? I mean, which makes sense because that's one of the most impactful policy tools local governments have through town meeting, and they have those boards to manage them. So,
Can I bring up a point?
Go.
We know that Envision Easton is on the back burner. Stephanie Danielson kind of stepped aside while PACE was doing its thing. And I think that we might want to wait and not talk about establishing a new growth advisory committee and maybe allow that to take shape. Because this does, you know, cause us to look at just yet another committee, and they may have something that they would like to run with themselves as part of their Envision Easton. So I'm not in favor of adding in the committee.
couldn't there be some way to tie so what Denise is referring to in Envision Easton, we have a state law, communities I think of a certain size have to have a master plan that lays out a lot of some of these things. Easton adopted one 10 years ago. It's going through a process to update it. They have been following along with a lot of what PACE has been doing. And the master plan, just like the school strategic plan, that we tie back to for a lot of our budgeting priorities, why we're doing what we're doing. So I think this is similar to the conversation about the first paragraph, Denise. I think that's a really good point. I worry about leaving, and maybe you are not suggesting eliminating all of this. I would worry if PACE didn't acknowledge that this was feedback, not necessarily creating a committee, but being more pro-growth. I think we heard pretty much constantly through the open houses and other things. So I don't know, there's a way to
Absolutely. I'd like to clarify that keeping it in there, keeping this whole structure is important. I just challenge the necessity of having yet another committee that we are putting into this written structure, not allowing that natural process of the formal planning to run its own course as well.
Sorry, Chris, thank you.
But this committee would be focusing on one particular area, while Envision Easton, it focuses on many different areas. And so if you have one committee that's only towards, as it says, growth advisory committee, it's all about growth. Envision Easton, or the master plan, included growth, but growth was not the sole compartment of the master plan. So to have this subsumed by Envision Easton wouldn't really accomplish what we're looking for. It's just my suggestion.
I'm sort of, this might ring untrue as someone who's currently serving on several committees, but is the pushback against another committee just the sheer bureaucracy of having someone else that's somehow a deliberating and voting body? Because I think, to your point, like if you have something that is distinctly designed and deputized to do this, and people are willing to serve on it, then great, right? Like, let's go. Look at us.
That's what I was going to just say, is akin
Right.
to PACE. You know, we felt that was a necessity in order to get this work done
Right.
in a structured environment with specific deliverables, not to be, swayed's not the right word, but, you know, allowed that to be focused on as compared to other committees if we.
Couldn't you
felt
just
that
carve
was-
out a seat for somebody on this committee, for somebody from,
Say that again from the
couldn't you
beginning?
just carve out a seat on this committee for somebody from Envision Easton?
You could.
Just
Oh,
like
yeah, there you go.
In this committee, you mean the Grove
the
Committee?
new.
Yeah.
You could. I thought you meant PACE. I was like, I think we're good.
There's never mind.
We got enough people.
Patrick, I
It's
didn't.
RSVP, no.
I didn't tell you, Patrick, but, anyway.
I think
Oh, great.
the intent was like, do we want to talk about setting up a new committee, or can we find a way to empower existing committees to
Right.
adopt a pro-growth stance with a due date? In theory, we tried to set some like, hey, this is due by annual town meeting 2026, 2027, something like that.
Well, I think you could do both, right? You can establish the growth committee that can be this kind of cross-sectional team of people looking specifically at that one issue, but also carve out that. And I know Dottie's on. I don't want to speak for the select board, but the select board will encourage and support the existing policy boards in reg review ahead of the growth committee finalizing its stuff, right? Because there's going to be some things that, like the planning board has already been looking at upzoning and has already done it in certain parts of town that you see more development in, right? So that's something that committee has already shown openness to. So you wouldn't want them to feel they have to wait till 2027, right? So I think you could do both, right? I don't know if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it was just to keep an open mind to the group. Like, I don't think we knew what the best answer was, but to not talk about growth in some capacity, whether it's a new committee or finding a way to ensure that these other committees are looking at pro-growth or adopt a more pro-growth stance if they have not already, and then try to provide deliverables by X. We put town meeting 2027 because I know it all ultimately has to be voted on by town meeting.
Yes, or yeah, most of it. I mean, you could do like reg review, which is more like permitting process, which is important, and we're doing that. We just want a grant to do permitting and admin level review for efficiency, but the really big picture stuff, yes, has to come through those boards to town meeting.
Yep.
Yeah. And numerous public hearings and all that stuff.
Is there anyone online who has a comment on this?
Dottie does.
Thank you, Dottie.
Hello. I just feel that maybe we could consolidate the economic development and the new growth and make that one committee. The economic development committee has a lot in common, and even the action items that were in their plan from the last master plan, I think that it would mesh together. The challenge with creating a lot of new committees is that select board representatives usually have to be a part of those, and we just don't have the capacity to do that with the number of committees that we're on. I mean, adding one more, it's not the end of the world, but we're always eager to add one more, and I think that consolidating it with the Economic Development Committee might be a better solution.
Thank you. So maybe some language that says this new growth committee will come out of the current economic growth committee or something. And I liked your language, Connor, around the select board will continue to assist existing committees in being ahead of new growth with their policy and procedures. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the formal thing, Dottie, are you thinking like a reformation of the Economic Development Council to have an explicit charge that's pro-growth and perhaps add some of the seats for the land use boards on it?
Yes.
Okay. Is that palatable?
I think that's acceptable.
That works.
Okay.
Yep. I'll start rewriting.
I have some of this language too, reformation with specific charges and seats.
Connor, to Dottie's point, is there already a select board representative on that economic council? Okay.
There is, yes. But Dottie, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's actually, I think we've encouraged members of those other committees to volunteer to be appointed, but are there carved out representative seats?
The select board has a carved out seat and the planning board has a carved out seat.
Yeah. So we could expand that and I think it's kind of inherent. If you're on an economic development council, you're probably relatively pro-growth, but I think expanding it, making that clear to include, reg review and things like that can accomplish this, and then add something in here for the select board to support and encourage the existing regulatory boards in any efforts to advance the following, because then you go on to highlight in areas 2 and 3, particularly things that some of these boards work on already that, those boards having support and direction is important, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that makes sense. I have a lot of notes too, Jim. We can work together. But then that leads us to these 3 areas of focus that I think they fall nicely under that now as the detail of, as you said, kind of these things that these boards already do, but they do it with some direction. And does anybody have any issues with those 3 bullets under the key areas of focus?
The last one, zoning adjustments. There's a lot of specificity here. Can it be more general? Zoning adjustments will be explored to increase, and you only call out density in appropriate areas. Utilizing tools such as upzoning. These are, I think that if you're going to do infrastructure prioritization, if you make it more general as to specific elements within zoning, because these are not all the elements within zoning, and they are ones that can raise the hackles on people's neck. So I think looking at zoning adjustments and zoning differences is a good thing to do, but to call out specifically where they look within this
Document
section
itself,
might be a little bit too authoritarian.
Do you suggest some other language, Chris, that would make it more general, that would give this committee a little more
Zoning
room?
adjustments will be explored to further the best use of land or property within the town of Easton to promote whatever it is that we're trying to promote.
You could just subset that into the first one then.
Well, actually, so my question, Chris, would be, and I appreciate it, I think you're right, that when you call out, and I think that's why calling something out might be important, is if you say something more general, like explore zoning for the best use is in the eye of the beholder. I think what PACE is drawing a line on, and what we heard from people very regularly, was growth.
Correct.
And you know this firsthand, right? With the real estate we have and the amount of wetlands that we have, the only real growth is infill and redevelopment, right? There's some opportunity for new builds, but I'll look to you too, Chris. But I mean, isn't density the answer?
Yeah, I was going to say, is there any other zoning adjustment we would be pursuing effectively? Like,
I
if we
think
don't call it out.
You could look at zoning. You could look at zoning changes, taking
Right.
some residential and turn it into business.
Okay.
You can do that. Now, when you're talking about density, when you're talking about height, building height, then you're talking about the fire department, because one of the reasons why it's only so tall is because you have to have a ladder to reach the taller building. So now when you do something like that, then you're looking for an increase of cost in the fire department. I mean, these are the types of things that it can be tricky, and so for this language, I think general is better than specific. That's all I'm saying. I mean, you can add in the specificity that you think is important, but I think you can trip yourself up if you get too specific.
Maybe, can I make a suggestion that maybe we could strike the zoning adjustments and just add a sentence to the land use policy committees that reads something like any resultant zoning changes would require approval at town meeting. Something like that.
Yeah, because I feel like it's implied.
No, I think Jen is saying take the last sentence of that third sub-bullet and stick it at the end of the first sub-bullet. Is that right, Jen?
And that's it, and
get rid
call
of
it done.
sub-
Yep,
bullet.
and then get rid of the rest of the zoning
Yeah,
adjustments, because
kill
they're
the whole
really,
bullet.
It's already listed above, including the Planning and Zoning Board, Conservation Committee, and Historical Commission.
yeah, and that gets to the goal of maximizing development opportunities and economic growth.
That's what I think I was thinking of is when Chris was saying to be more general,
Yeah.
not disagreeing, but you already have a pretty general land use policy bullet there that you could just enhance instead of having a third one necessarily.
Everybody okay with that change? Okay.
Jocelyn has a hand up.
Oh, thank you, Jocelyn.
Is the purpose of this new growth committee ultimately increasing revenue? And if so, should we clearly state that?
Good point.
Yeah, I think that's fair feedback because one of the things that I'm terrible at is being too pickled in this stuff to assume that that's obvious, right? So, so I think that's a really good point to, and maybe in the introductory to acknowledge what is a fact in municipal finance, which is the only way to increase the tax levy without an override is new growth. Therefore, PACE prioritizes X, Y, and Z.
I think it's worth it. I have like the opposite eyes of Connor, like completely outside of everything. So I was looking at this like, what's the point? Trying to read it as someone who hasn't called into all of these meetings and isn't listening to these discussions. I think I would read this and think, what's the point of this?
Great.
No, that's a really, that's
No, that's
really
excellent.
important
So I think
feedback.
that could be a good lead-in sentence. And then I was even thinking at the top of the next page where it says growth, you could say, in order to increase revenue while balancing the needs of the community there. You could sort of do it both places and, okay.
Denise
Thank you.
also has her hand up as an FYI.
Denise, thank you.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the length of this because I understand our intention. It's starting to look like a warrant in itself and that it becomes a little bit more regulatory than a recommendation. We're going really deep into some of these areas where what we may want to say as our focus is that if we look, such as a vision, then we will accomplish such. Because we're starting to go down some rabbit holes here. I'm just really concerned about that.
Am I wrong in that the expectation is that this is essentially a warrant article? It really is, right? This is.
No, you were wrong.
But like the effect of understanding.
I love to be able to say to the chair of a finance committee. It's been on my dream board for so long.
You can check that off.
Finally came over his face.
I did
All
say
due respect.
I did say in essence, but the point is that I'm adorable. But my point is that to Denise's point, right, that the specificity is the goal because it's. I'm just going to keep using your example, right? It is a promise back to the town of, here's the expected outlay that we're going to be putting in this, right? So okay, so fine, it's not a warrant article. I'm very wrong, but it's got that same specificity to it to provide that level of when you vote for this, if you do vote for this, these are the promises in print, literal, that will be part of that acceptance of that vote. Am I wrong about that part?
So, no, I mean, the way that this is written,
We're back.
I retract my declaration of your incorrectness. No, the goal here is a document that PACE transmits to the Select Board, Finance Committee, and School Committee and says, hey, we all worked on this for a while, and these are commitments we think we should make. I think Denise's point is fair that it's long.
Sure.
I also feel like some of that's just a matter of formatting and like the intro and the conclusion statements, and that once we all kind of agree on the meat of it, that the three folks who are kind enough to work on this already can probably squeeze this into 3 pages, I bet, without making substantive changes, right? And maybe cut back on some of the additional detail without losing the meaning. Denise, would that be better?
I'm concerned about the depth and level of promises or 4 square corners that we are making in this written piece. I know our intention. I certainly understand completely and entirely what we're we're hoping to do. I think that we're going really deep in some of these lines. And I'm concerned about that because again, we can unroll just as quickly as we can roll, going deep. Couldn't it be, somewhat favorable to say, the intention of looking at some of our zoning articles or some of our permitting policies or some of the land use policies are restrictive and we hope to ease them, and with its net result being new growth and ergo, more business and so forth, the purpose, without having to go into some great detail as we are right here. I completely understand why we're doing it. Completely.
Nancy?
But again, this is going to the town. This is going to other people that do not have the benefit of the depth or the experience that we have on this committee.
Well, thank you, Denise. I'm just going to go to Jim.
Thank you. Denise, I do agree with you. I think one of my concerns and one of the reasons I think we went a little bit more in depth was a lot of people had said to me, so if you get the override, what is the town going to do? Or in 3 years, are we just going to come back and be like, please give us another override? Thanks for 3 years ago. And so I do think we have to balance the language in here with what are concrete, actionable items, deadlines, things that town, and I'm not putting Connor and Dr. Cabral, but town and town committees can start working on in the next 3 years and start delivering real results and communications to the citizens to say, we hear your concerns. We are concerned about the rising cost of living, and this is what we are doing, and these are the goals we're striving for in the next 3, 4, 5 years to hopefully prevent, needing another override in the near future, or at least mitigating it.
I agree with you, Jim. I think if we don't have enough detail, then they don't become measurable. And I think that's what the community wants to see, some measurable goals, that if they're too vague, it's like, how do you measure whether or not we've attained them?
Is there an opportunity for compromise with that of like, okay, we have this like technical weedy document here, but even when you just look at this, the way it was organized, you could have the like full document that goes to these boards. It'd be public document, we could have it. But we've done this a lot with PACE, right? Where we have like the 700-page version of something, and then like, do you want to look at a slide deck instead? And so maybe we have the super detailed thing available, that's what the boards actually review and adopt, but then you just take a summary version that's literally just the headlines.
The 5 bullet
the 5 headlines
areas
and
with a
maybe
sentence
the
under
key
each.
sub-bullets, and it says, for all detail, the full pledge is here, right? Because I think Denise, I don't think anyone's gonna be sitting maybe some people will be sitting at town meeting in May reading through the 5 pages of size 10 font, but I think you could have both.
I like that idea.
I'm being,
Patrick?
And like a cover page and then.
yeah.
So if I could cheekily compare this to something, perhaps a Warren article, would you have something, would you potentially have something associated, like the way that we do Warren articles, where we have the text, the text of text that someone from the select board gets up and reads, and then the summary at the bottom of it is like, effectively, here's the impact.
Yeah. Well, so yes, but if you did that all in one document, then all you would do is take the 5-page document and make it.
No, I'm saying, the summary is essentially what that deliverable would be.
Yeah, I think you would just take the main headlines and say, PACE, repeated core feedback, because this reflects feedback we heard from folks, right? So
yes, it does.
I think as the town administrator, my hesitation would be if you only have the bulleted list, someone will then
Snuck something in.
What does that mean?
there wasn't a carve out here for an administrative consent order. It's like, well, that was on the detailed version. Like, well, I didn't read that. But there's no way, we can't kind of have it all. So I think Denise's point is a good one.
I do too.
But
I think
I
we
also
can do that.
I agree with what Jim is saying, and I heard it myself at open houses. I think a lot of people here heard it. Is, well, what's the plan?
Yeah.
If this passes, and Chris's point is a good one. Like, some of these specifics could have people who might support an override say, well, I don't like that, right? But and now is kind of the last chance for PACE to say differently, but has this committee reached a conclusion different than if you're going to try to limit overrides, you have to lean into growth.
Everybody
Yeah.
agrees with that.
Concur. So I think being specific is important, but maybe you just do what we've done with so many of our other materials where we have the kind of technical document and then there's here's a 1 or 2 page more.
I think we can do that. I don't think that would be difficult.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of comments for section 2. So in the Land Use Policy Committee, second line towards the end, could we add the word may to will assess and may revise policies?
Thank you.
And then we talked about moving that zoning changes up, striking the zoning adjustments. This the bullet about town administration. This may be getting too far into the weeds with policy, but is the role of town administration to support policies or to abide by policies? I don't.
I feel like that's directed.
Well, or like I know, like for school committee, right? We're a policy-making committee,
Sure.
And then the district executes based on those policies. They're not, whether or not they support policies doesn't really, not to say it doesn't matter, but that's not material to right operations. So I don't know what the intent was of this statement and how we can maybe rewrite it to.
So I'm
Consider the
comfortable with the
intent.
statement. I think Easton's charter is pretty unique and progressive. It is clear that despite the title of administrator, that this role is expected to take a vocal position on policy recommendations. It is ultimately the select board's authority and decision on what becomes policy. I am not uncomfortable with saying we'll support.
Okay.
I can't ultimately kind of say something about an executive order, but I can't decree policy that's not kind of already established to my position by the charter. So I'm comfortable with it. Dottie's on the call. If Dottie feels differently, obviously I respect that. But
I think Dottie had to drop.
Dottie dropped.
Yeah.
That was a great question, Jen. Good point of
I feel comfortable with
clarification.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I don't know if anyone feels differently. I'm not trying to.
No, no, but it was good to hear you say that because if someone else asked that same question.
Is this section to affirm that the town administration will not prevent efficiency in certain situations? Is that what this is for? I mean, you could have obstructionists. You could have people on boards who are obstructionists. They'll do everything they can to make sure that whatever is to go through is going to go through.
Sure.
Even though it's in violation of a policy. Is this to affirm that the town administration will always work efficiently towards efficiency of progress?
So I don't think I wrote it, but how I would read this is saying we have all these policy boards who are going to try to take a pro-growth lens, and that the administration will support them.
Right, and it's just, to me, when I'm reading it, I'm saying, I see that the town administration is going to support the proper processing procedures where some boards may be obstructionist and obstruct
Sure. Yeah,
development of some sort.
Sure. So I'm not saying this about an existing board in Easton, but yes, something like this is important, right? And I think another example, a good example, right? So when talking about the value of PACE, saying we did all this work, we heard this from the community, is there's going to come a time, hopefully soon, where the budget is not such an excruciating process. And as everyone here knows, once that happens, engagement really drops, right? And it will be helpful that when I or Dr. Brawl are in year 2 or 3 of this and are carrying something forward and someone new to the process, why are you doing that? I don't support this. And I say, well, there was this exhaustive process where the community weighed in and prioritized these things. It's no different than a master planning process where somebody says to the planning board, why are you supporting this? Say, well, we did this big process with the community, and these were the priorities that were identified. So I view it as a helpful tool.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yes, I'm agreeing with you as well.
Well, that was good to talk about that. And I see it as well as part of that promise to the town.
Right.
That this is what will happen in the future. It's Good. Any other comments on that? May we move to number 3, the infrastructure prioritization?
I like 3.
I like 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is nothing,
Three
this
seems
is like
very
exactly
well
what
done.
happens now, right?
Yeah, I think 3 is ideal.
Any comments from online?
No hands. Yeah.
Okay.
5, 4, 3, 2.
May we,
Nope.
can we move to 4? I don't need to rush everyone. It seemed a little bit, okay, number 4. Thank
I
you,
have a
Chris.
question on number 4. The
Okay,
town
thank
will
you.
place a moratorium on the acquisition of new land for passive preservation purposes. Of course, this affects the CPA or the CPC directly, but if you have something where passive preservation is also a water protection, does that then preclude buying land that would preserve a water resource for the town of Easton?
So a few people I think contributed to some suggestion in this area, and I will fall on the sword as one of them and to say I thought more about it and I think I was wrong. Because I think it's somewhat redundant, because it says we will not acquire land unless it's approved by town meeting. We can't acquire land.
That was my question.
Unless town meeting approves it.
Right.
Yep.
So this was one that I 2 weeks ago said, oh, that's because it sounds coherent within the framework of growth. And one of the things that we've heard so much and talked about is that there is an economic cost and a tax impact of having a lot of preserved land. And having it, unless it's approved by town meeting. Town meeting is the only body that can approve purchasing land. So I think that's a fair point. I think again, I'm speaking because I want to put a suggestion like that. I think a fair compromise there is that as part of rights of a way that it works right now, you have a citizen committee. It's often coming through CPA or the Conservation Commission. And this could also get them away, comprehensive planning sometimes as part of existing zoning regulations. A development that may be denser, which we are encouraging, may have to provide a certain amount of, okay, we're going to do a higher amount of density on these 9 pieces of land, but we'll preserve the 10th. And would this then undercut the ability to do that and blow up that whole development? I think perhaps a middle ground, and I'll put this out and let everyone else weigh in, is if the town is going to put a preservation acquisition in front of town meeting, that before it's on the warrant, the body seeking to do so files like a financial impact analysis of, because some land that we preserve is already not going to be buildable, right? So it's or may already be like a 61A or something that's can't generate tax or new growth much anyway. So maybe it's that there has to be a financial or an economic impact or an opportunity cost impact, right? There's a big difference between putting a preservation restriction on land that's largely not buildable already and buying. And I'm not thinking of a specific example in Easton, but like buying a piece of land specifically so it can't be developed. Those are different things that that I know the CPA weighs, but that they could file as part of a warrant article, an analysis of, here's what this land is now, here's why we wish to preserve it. It could, under existing land use and environmental regs, be built out as X. That's part of the appraisal they have to do, but making it more specific that would have to be articulated through the warrant review of Select Board Finance Committee before it goes to town meeting. I don't know if that's
Well, I'm
helpful
wondering,
or...
no, it's very helpful what you're saying, and listening, I'm wondering if this whole part 4 is sort of redundant, because we've already carved out the committees and the policies who have to have sort of a growth perspective. Maybe we totally get rid of 4, shortening this document also, and then just add your sentence about the financial impact that would be required by land use committees before an acquisition.
That's fair.
Does that take
Back
care
in
of
paragraph 2, you could
Yes, totally get rid of 4.
Okay.
There we
and
go.
you could add,
Financial impact on any land
any
use
committee seeking
acquisition.
to acquire land must file something like that.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Chris, that was great. And number,
Just the word moratorium is going to be scary.
Yes.
So elimination of it is,
and that was the next long discussion, was going to be how long, and we talked about that for an hour. So this is, I think, a much better approach. Financial impact statement by any land acquisition
So we're getting rid of all four? The whole
Yes.
thing? Down to town meeting?
Yes. Does that satisfy your concern, Chris? I think.
That's existing, like, people could do that now.
Because it's redundant. We have it other places in the document.
I was going to ask whether or not would this preclude someone from trying to find a piece of preserved land at town meeting, which I don't think it would, right? You could essentially raise at town meeting, try to modify or change an existing article or an existing vote to be, hey, we want to add this in, or we want to combine this, and I think this takes that potential away. This takes the worry about it away.
Well, the first one, the moratorium in place for the buying of land, the CPA has money of its own, right? And that it wouldn't impinge upon the budget at all for the CPA to spend their money, right?
Correct, but I think it ties back to acknowledging that there's a recognition by a lot of the residents we've spoken to that, and I don't think anyone was necessarily saying, okay, we wish we could go undo all of that and not have preserved space and green space. I think it's more of just like a formalizing some of the kind of check and balance of, and not that, the current CPA is judicious about these things, they are, but just acknowledging that there's an economic perspective, not solely a preservation perspective, right?
Well, there's three perspectives for the CPA.
Yes.
Land is one.
Yes. I think
So
what...
they could still purchase land for the other two. They could purchase land for housing, right?
Yes, I think really the question is if there's going to be a committee seeking to add to the town's existing portfolio of preserved land that's non-tax paying, that there is some kind of analysis justifying why, right? Including like, is this otherwise developable?
The intent was pause the buying of conservation land.
Yep, exactly.
To allow economic development if it's developable land for X number of years.
So we'll put that financial impact statement up under 2. The last one on this section 5. This one requires some conversation too, because it might be some limiting language here.
Yeah, I don't really understand the intent of number 5. It's very broad. I have concerns about how do you define what a program or an initiative are? How do you define what fully funded is?
What if 2 programs might work very well, kind of working together and aligning together?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the definition of a program, if it's an economic benefit for that program to be run, Blanche Ames had a program, right? Going through the entire process for that. The economic impact of that was that there was an outlay, but we saved 30-something million, whatever it was, that from that build, like that was my concern there too.
Yeah, timing is everything.
Is this too broad of a statement?
So is there a way to tighten this language, or is this another paragraph that we feel we've addressed in other?
I wasn't sure. My thought was, essentially, I don't know what to do with the first sentence, but the bullet sort of speaks to that other piece that I raised, where it's like, hey, there might be things coming down the path that we don't want to limit the investigation and engagement on, because there's the potential for additional funds to be obtained by. We outlay some amount of funds, they then provide, right? So maybe that's the actual number 5.
Just strike that
kill the first
sentence and have the bullet. Is that?
Was there a specific prompt in some of the feedback from the last time that inspired this that anybody recalls, and we can just maybe speak to what it was attempting to address?
Do you want to speak to this,
Sure.
Jim, or is there any more detail that you would add?
Do you care about cases?
No. The language, I think, was just attempting to, in my mind, help the town focus and prioritize where it's spending money. I used an extreme example that is not happening for the record, but is Easton going to pursue a monorail program when we don't fully fund our infrastructure on our roads today? That was the intent of the statement, is and again, I think it comes back to, what is the town going to do with an override? What is the town going to prioritize? And I think a lot of people do have that question, and it's like, I think I've even said it before, but it's like, I do personally, and this is personal, but like, do prioritize the fact that we're not fully funding our road maintenance right now. And you could insert X, Y, or Z. We don't have the optimal number of firefighters, or we don't have the optimal number of police. Like, those are things that I would personally prioritize rather than someone coming in with a really exciting idea of a monorail that connects North and South Easton, and we start to pursue that for some reason. I know that's an extreme, but that was the trying to get that language into the draft was the point.
Does this bullet, maybe with some revision, get at it, or is it not having select board discretion what you're talking about? So if we got rid of that first sentence and just said, should there be opportunities from the federal or state government to initiate infrastructure projects or other community enhancement projects, the select board has the discretion to reprioritize programs, or is that what the concern is, that this now discretion lies with the select board?
Well, to be clear, it always
goes to town
does, right? But I hear what you're saying. I guess the question is like, how do you get at that without? Because what I would worry about is that conflicting with number 3, right? Because somebody could turn around and say, well, our roads aren't fully funded, we shouldn't build a sewer, right? And so that's where I would get. Or when people start overlapping your operating deficits or challenges with your capital ones, right? As we've seen, is like a very common discussion with building projects versus operations. And so I get what you're saying, and I agree. I don't know if there's a way to address that, and I think some of these things, for instance, like prohibiting a debt exclusion kind of does a certain part of that. Right. Capping operating growth does another part. Like there's only, so the number that's in here right now, 4%, like that will already challenge just sustaining, let alone with the other things going on. So I don't think that I think the other things in here are already going to kind of bake in that the likelihood that I will be able to stand up like a town hall annex with 15 analyst positions is 0. So I don't know. I get what you're saying. I don't know how you convey it without it perhaps being able to be kind of very open to interpretation and folks saying, well, this says nothing new, but you want to do a sewer, and so I don't know.
Yeah.
Should we strike number 5? Do you feel, Jim, that these things are covered in other places in the document? I mean, you raise a good point, and I'm sure that these concerns are being raised by the community. Would we be able to explain to them, yes, that this concern is covered in other parts of the document? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, we feel like it's covered elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think it's valid.
Can I throw something in for just a quick second? It feels like a great document without a mission statement in some ways. And if we had a quasi mission statement in some ways saying what our intent is, that it could say it in fewer words. Our intention is that with growth, we'll invite business, greater taxation, easing some of our regulatory land use policies. Sum that up in some kind of a statement saying this is our intention, as opposed to making a covenant. Because this feels a covenant in a way.
Are you suggesting that mission statement instead of this document, or just to open it?
No, I think that, if we started at the top and said that the purpose of our pledge is to promote growth, because without growth, we just don't have a way to increase our financial standings. Without some changes and modifications, we can't accomplish this. It's just near impractical and impossible to do.
So maybe what you're suggesting is in this first paragraph, we have a last sentence right now that says, this compact is structured around 5 primary objectives aimed at ensuring fiscal responsibility, promoting sustainable growth, and protecting the well-being of the town's residents. It sounds like you'd like to maybe flesh out another sentence there about...
Right. I think less is more, and simpler is certainly going to hit our audience a whole lot easier.
So you want to change that language and offer something else? Is that what you're suggesting?
Is it, kind of tying back to the charge of PASE? PASE is supposed to promote sustainability, and we think that takes an override to fix the glaring hole gap right now. And in order to sustain that for as long as we can without asking taxpayers for another increase, we need to promote growth, focus on sustaining the programs and infrastructure we have, prioritizing new initiatives, mostly when they support what we're doing already, stuff like that. I don't know. Basically do a 2-sentence version of the 5 numbered things. Denise?
Yes, something shorter, readable, understandable, because I understand, why we're bullet pointing, and I understand, why we intend to do it. But I think that if we have something broader, it would be far reaching, because it doesn't tie us. It doesn't hold our hands either. And some of these are they're hard for us to understand and comprehend. So let's think about what the public is.
Well, Denise, we already spoke about having 2 documents, a document that would be the detailed document with all of this text and this detail, and then we would have a summary document that's more of bullets and headings and could include that sentence or 2 language that you're suggesting. Does that do it for you, or you're suggesting this instead of this document? I'm sorry, I'm not.
I think we've carved out an awful lot in this document itself that still leads to more information and more clarity. And I was hoping that the document that we put forth, that is a compact, that is a pledge with the community, is pretty simplistic. Like, what is our goal? What are we hoping to do? What is it? Can we sum it up and then have some bullet points? Because this is a very lengthy document.
Well, we can certainly do that.
And we could spend just as much time on this at the town meeting as we could on the vote.
So just to be clear, the compact would be adopted by those policy boards in advance of town meeting. It's not, because I agree, if you wanted to debate a 5-page covenant at town meeting, you'd be there for 3 weeks. So this, I hear you and the concern there, but I think that's why this would go to those policy boards to just adopt. And I think your point's well taken. PACE will need to, and this is going to be on Tom and Nancy, whoever presents at town meeting. Like any sales pitch, functionally, this needs to be able to be distilled into 2 or 3 sentences, and that would be the mission statement.
Right.
But Denise, do you feel? Have you not heard what Jim and others have raised, that people do want some amount of specificity of so what would you do with $7.3 million?
Yes, and I think that we've covered some of it with the paragraph 1, with the override, the debt exclusion and no operational override. Minimizing some of these, we've taken out paragraph 4. Some of these we've eliminated. I'm just trying to get it down so it's saying what we want to say in readable, understandable language without going way in the weeds. I can see the necessity in some of the further ones that we haven't yet discussed, but there's some of them that maybe we just don't want to go that deep. Maybe we just want to say to the town, this is what we have come. We realize that we cannot continue to be sustaining. We cannot sustain our budget without some growth, and this is what we need to do. This is why we need to do it without having the depth of this. This is just my opinion. I'm just envisioning myself how this is received at town meeting, because we're still trying to sell the override. Now we're adding another layer on top of this.
But I don't think we'll be.
This is something that needs to be sold as well.
Well, we won't. Marissa, I'm sorry, you wanted to speak.
What's the protocol on when this? I know we have to finalize this tonight, but I mean, theoretically, couldn't this be published beforehand?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Oh, it will be.
Yeah, yes.
So they could read the nitty-gritty document in advance, and we can provide a more salient, abridged version for anybody who wants that condensed. But if we can have both, right?
Correct.
Those
yes.
that require more information and want the nitty-gritty,
right?
And those that would prefer, give me the bite-sized version. What do I need to know? Done.
And I assume PACE will be presenting at town meeting?
Oh,
Is that-
yes.
So,
This can come out
so
beforehand.
that will come out beforehand, but we're not gonna bring this out
Well,
at
it's not
town
a
meeting.
debate on that subject at that point,
No,
right? And that's going to be uncomfortable, right?
It's a done deal at that point, signed
Yes,
by these three
there will
boards.
be, and Denise, don't let me misinterpret what you're saying, but that, you know, and we're all experiencing that now, are we not, with the dollar amount, right? But that was why PACE was given its job and spent the hundreds of hours doing it. And I think it makes it important that a document like this is available in advance. I think that, you know, PACE may want to have like one final open house type event in advance of town meeting where, you know, a more detailed explanation of why did we arrive at this outside of what we've obviously been discussing publicly, if folks want to come and engage that way. But I don't know. I feel very comfortable with PACE being somewhat specific, right? And I would, a lot of this will impact selfishly my work. If it was too specific that I felt it would undercut the legal prerogative of the select board or the charter, I would say. But I think that this will be available well in advance. This will be presented to the select board Monday. We're trying to meet with the finance committee next Wednesday. And I think that's also why we have the chairs of those boards represented here as well. So I don't know. I think if you have the summary document, I totally agree. You need a mission statement that's like 3 sentences of this. This will be part of the committee, whomever presents to town meeting, part of it. But I don't think it's not going to be a warrant article.
No, we're
to
not
be
working
approved or
through
not.
this at town meeting.
No.
So I think we should continue. We're more than halfway done, and I have a feeling that we're going to find some things that we're going to now. Oh, sorry.
Could I just clarify?
Please.
It sounded like, but I don't, because Jim, you were the one who raised it. Are we comfortable,
I was
to
gonna go
Denise's
back to
point,
5,
if we,
yeah. Oh.
but if we make that mission more clear of like prioritizing sustainability, supporting what we have right now, that you would be comfortable with 5 being deleted for brevity? Sure. Cool.
Thank you. I was going to get back to that. Thank you very
Couldn't that
much.
also be added into like the budget caps component?
Well,
as
yes, and that's where I think we're gonna find as we go on, this actually might go a little more quickly, isn't that wishful thinking? Because I think we're gonna find that we've hit some of these things and we're gonna see some redundance. But thank you, Denise, I totally agree, I would not want to be presenting this document to town meeting.
Nancy, should we take a break
Oh.
for the rest of it? Or if you all want to just power through, you all.
I'm really open either way. Would folks like a break?
Yeah.
I could use one.
Okay, ECAT, we're going to take a 10 minutes. Is that sufficient for folks online? We're going to take a 10-minute break.
What
and
about
we'll
3 minutes? Is that too little?
Oh my goodness gracious. I think that, does that put us at 8:45? Am I looking at my clock right? Okay, thank you very much. Make sure you Thank you. Okay, so we were just working through this community pledge, and we're about to talk about Section 3, minimizing impact on seniors, veterans, and individuals with disabilities. And it starts out with some educational efforts and then gets into some expansion of the financial tax relief programs. I had no comments or concerns about any of this section for discussion.
I had one item, which is
Thank
not
you.
a comment or concern, which was, you could make this point about most of these, but like of all of them, I thought this could be one that independent of any acceptance of anything that happens, no matter what happens, this seems like a really fantastic idea to implement regardless, right? So like,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that's an independent piece or we have to consider that, but I thought this was worded well.
No.
I agree with the educational effort is a huge outreach that we should definitely be doing. And sort of win, lose, or draw, I think this is a good thing to push out there.
So if I could, Patrick, I think it's fair feedback. The concern is item 2.
And yet, look how bad I am.
Denise, your mic, you're
I got her.
unmuted. Item 2, in order to expand those programs, that costs money.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Right. So when an abatement is functionally, it's actually carried. Is it on the revenue or the expense side? On the expense side, as an overlay. Yes, Wendy.
Yes.
Okay. So we have to budget for tax cuts or relief in programs, and we already do kind of look at those as part of regular business. But some of these, particularly under Heroes, I don't have the specifics in front of me. Some of them are actually rather impactful, which is great. But in the larger the economic benefit for a recipient than necessarily the more material the budget impact. So I just want to be transparent that I would have some concern about pledging that we could dramatically expand those types of abatement programs if we didn't have the financial capacity, right? Because if an override doesn't pass, we're going to be going into next year using millions in reserves and cutting tremendous amounts. So that's all I would put
No,
out.
it's a great point. I was wrong about the extent.
Are there any other comments or edits? Thank you, Chris.
I think it's important. It's not lost on this committee about the impacts the elderly that this will have, and I think it's important that people in TV land or whatever, realize that this was greatly taken into consideration. I've seen on social media, this is one of the biggest things that when it surprised some people, and it's the financial impact on the people that aren't working, i.e. elderly. It's a big deal, and we recognize it. So I just wanted that noted that I'm glad that this is in here.
Thank you for saying that, Chris. I would echo that. This committee continues to emphasize and want these things in any of our communications. Any comments from online, Patrick?
I muted Denise because
Sorry, I didn't hear what Chris just said. I don't know if your microphone's on.
Chris, is your mic on?
Yeah. Agreed.
Oh, I don't know. Sorry. Can you repeat what you said?
Yeah, Jocelyn, can you hear him now? Can you hear
Yeah,
us?
yeah. It was just muffled. Maybe it was covered or something, but I couldn't make out what you were saying.
It was the fresh maker.
I don't think I can be that eloquent.
Sorry. Wasn't meant to be.
Just assume it was really nice.
Got it.
Is this just section 1 or is this section 2 you're talking about?
We're
the whole thing.
The whole thing.
I have to say it's a first for me to be considered a vulnerable population. So I'm just marking that right now, that I'm now a vulnerable population.
Are there any other comments from folks online?
I guess I do. Is the circuit breaker program, is it gonna be written out how it's going to work sometime in the future, or?
Yes, so that is a unique program to Easton that we adopted as part of the 2023 town meeting for the Police Fire Public Works project. This is not, so a lot of the financial relief programs we could do are local acceptances that cities and towns can do because state law says they can if they choose to. There's no provision for this. So this was a special act that we petitioned the state legislature to let us do this, even though there's no carve out of the law. And because there's no legal framework for it, it had a lifespan on it of 3 years. And it has been signed into law. It goes into effect in July. And the assessors, the chief assessor of the board of assessors, have to pull together the application criteria this year so folks can apply for it. I think, ahead of the actuals for, there's a cycle to abatement filings already, and I think is that typically in the fall.
For this program, we're looking for it to be in the fall.
Yeah.
Around
This is an
October.
abatement.
Yeah, so this program is on the books, but it's for 3 years, and what this is suggesting is if there's an override and additional funds to pay for those tax breaks, to petition the state legislature to extend it. But yes, the way that this program would work is that if you are a senior who already qualifies for the Massachusetts tax break, the circuit breaker tax break, which is a refundable, I believe, income tax credit on your state income taxes, for folks who have a higher value home and a lower income, and they can get a credit, I think, up to $2,500.
That's $2,750.
Yeah, 20, which has increased. They doubled it recently, which is great.
I just did my taxes.
So you'll tell me if I'm getting it wrong. And so the state has data on who in each community qualifies for that. It lags. It's not like real time. Okay. And so our view on that, much like we've been more often now sticking to 80% area median income, which is a much higher threshold, so more people can qualify for assistance than using more old school measures like federal poverty lines, because those are just so low. We thought, okay, this is already a means testing program that exists rather than us reinventing the wheel, and we can roughly quantify the number of properties that would qualify. And the idea here was that as the tax impact of the police, fire, and public works starts to come online in those first few years, and before in 27 when the debt from OA expires, to net that out, having the ability for us to defray some of that for folks. So if you're already qualifying for that state tax credit, then you would likely qualify for this to further abate the tax impact. So that was the idea.
Okay.
The application will be a lot simpler.
So when
than
people
what I just
ask,
said.
I can.
That is coming for this fiscal year. Yes. Whether the override passes or not. That was passed as part of the debt exclusion in 23.
It's an excellent program. Anything else on this section 3? Okay with that?
I liked it.
Yeah, nice next section. Section 4, budget efficiencies and annual caps. This is where the conversation, I think, will really be around the percent growth limit that's chosen, this rolling 2-year average of growth. You'll see 4% written in the document, and that is very closely aligned with the 3.7, which is the average of all of the voting. 4 is what we discussed at the last meeting. So I'll just sort of open it up first for any comments on that first section there.
So I'm just, the 2-year, did that fit with the 4-year
This
the 2-year, the rolling 2-year average of 4% growth?
That has nothing to do with the 4-year limit before there'd be another override. That has to do with how this growth rate is calculated, and maybe I can let Connor and Wendy
Yeah, so
speak to
my
that.
idea of having it be a 2-year, and this is just my opinion, but I was trying to carve some flexibility there, because if it's a static annual cap, you are going to incentivize always requesting 4% every year, no matter what, right? So you will create an incentive structure that even in years where maybe there's retirements, there's efficiencies, and you can make do with 3. If you can't ask for more than 4 ever, you're going to incentivize people to ask for
Always
4,
ask for
right? So my thought process was, okay, if we have those, right? Honestly, up until even last year, the town's increase was 4.25, but before that, on average, it was between 2.5 and 3.75. By having that be, in 2 years, I felt was tight enough that you might have a lean year where you can make 3 work with no layoffs, and then the next year you might have a spike in your utility costs, which are carried in operating budgets, and you may need 4.5. And as long as those 2 years don't go over 8, then it gives some flexibility. That was what I was thinking.
So rolling means average?
Yeah, I don't know if there's I would look to Wendy to give a more precise. I mean, perhaps you would say that you
It's
can't
okay.
cumulatively.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take the 2 years.
Looking at 2 years at a time.
Yeah,
I don't know
that
if
it's
that's a
4%
vernacular.
a year. I was just trying to not create an incentive structure for people to always max
point.
out at 4, right?
I would be in favor of including like a not to exceed language in there so that it doesn't seem like 4% is the number.
To your average not to exceed 4% growth, would that be an appropriate place to put that in?
Yes.
Okay. And would both Jen for the schools and Connor like to comment on what that looks like for your operations? Is 4% going to be a challenge? Is it going to be easy? Would you each like to comment on that?
From the school standpoint, it'll absolutely be a challenge. That is far below our just level service rollovers for the past several years. Absolutely, yep. Yep. I mean, you know, if the override, if passes, is still only going to allow for a limited amount of funds. And so I think it's important for voters to know that, especially in the, you know, we have historically presented our budgets with, you know, reactive, proactive, regressive, et cetera, that the override is still, you know, keeping at this percent of growth, we are still going, I would imagine we are still going to be in reactive mode for the duration. I don't see that getting us to proactive based on even just the very basics of personnel increases. So the cost of living adjustments that get negotiated plus step and lanes alone exceed or come close to that amount, plus any you know, vendor payments and transportation, healthcare, et cetera. So it'll still be a very restrictive budget at 4%.
Thank you. Townside?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things I had flagged in the initial homework was, and that's not me saying therefore PACE shouldn't do it, because I think it was quite common in the other communities that had these pledges to set some expectation, right, from the voters who are asking, well, if you're provided this, what will you do? But to echo what Jen's saying, this is not going to mean that we're going, so if we say we won't seek an operating override to fiscal 30, I mean, it's very likely, depending on other things happening economically, that could mean that you're still having to roll back staff at some point in that period. And I wouldn't want to mislead people to think otherwise. And that was a lot of the kind of discussion and feedback at the open house as well. And it's a discussion around 8 versus 7.3 versus a proactive number, right? But that's how we have to balance that with, like, the reality is, even 4%, if healthcare and other fixed costs keep growing, we're going to have a really tough time, right? And depending on how we want to thread the needle on the final one on reserves and things like that, you know, I think it makes sense to put some line in the sand for the public. Mm-hmm. But I also wouldn't want to mislead and say, you know, if the override passes and there's 4%, then we're going to be able to, you know, be more proactive and do these innovative new programs and things. That's pretty unlikely. It won't be impossible, right? There will be opportunities along the way where, you know, maybe we regionalize another service, or there's some shared thing we can do that creates capacity within that 4% to maybe more appropriately staff police and fire, or some kind of citizen-facing or community programming service, it will really put pressure on. And frankly, I mean, there already is a tremendous amount of pressure on the town schools to try to be very efficient, and I think our budgets show that. So I don't know if I'm muddying the waters.
You know what, Connor? Not to interrupt, but from an optics standpoint, I originally wasn't crazy about this statement, but I actually like it now because I think it's showing that the schools and the town side are not just getting an NP credit card that they can just go nuts with. Like there are limits with. I mean, this will be greatly financially impacting families, and that is something that I hear all the time as far as, well, what are you going to do with it? Like, you're just going to, just overspend again or whatever like that. And not that I think the town overspends, but to your point, it will be tough, but I think it's demonstrating some fiscal responsibility that we're limiting ourselves to X, whatever that number is that we agreed on. So I think from an optics standpoint, to a voter that may be on the fence, using my logic brain, I think this is a very good statement because it just shows some responsibility.
Thank you, Chris. Any comments from folks online?
Nope.
I would
Wait,
like to add.
Denise is off mute. Denise?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I think that it gives some definition to the intent of us trying to kind of stay in controlled growth. It's just the intent. And now it's kind of a little bit more binding because we give it some parameters. We give it some limitation.
Thank you. Jen?
So the second sentence about allocating funds equitably across departments. To me, that's, I'm unclear on, does that mean just town and school split? Or is that on the town side, further going to police, fire, DPW,
that's
community
fair.
services, et cetera?
I would just say town and school because just because of the way that with ed reform, right, the schools are a bottom line for the whole district, whereas the town is technically departmental. I would not want to be, some of our departments are literally one person. I wouldn't want to have to allocate 3% there if we don't need to. Right, just like within the schools, if the school budget was going up 4, one school could technically be going up 7, and another could be going down. So,
Right.
yeah, I would just say it's just about the operations, total town, total school.
If I said the town will allocate funds equitably across town and school departments, does that satisfy? Or ensuring that these departments, that these two departments, or that these departments, or ensuring that maybe we don't even need that, ensuring that they receive an appropriate share of the available resources.
Okay, and I think that to me, that gets at the concern of if folks are voting for the override for a specific intent, right? So somebody says, I'm really supportive of public safety, or I'm really supportive of schools. And I've heard an argument against, over the years that, well, after the first year, it all just goes back in one pot and they can do whatever they want with it. So I think this helps to address that concern that we've heard from voters, that there will still be an equitable, kind of path forward.
Great. Good point. Very good point. Anything else on that first paragraph? Wendy, did you have something too?
Yeah, I do think it's important that we do establish some kind of limit on these amounts. And, 4%, it might be hard to live within, but it's also going to be hard to even fund. We're still going to be a minimum aid district. Our local receipts are only going to grow so much per year. And even with growth, I think it's important to just keep that in mind. And when you have fixed costs that go up at a higher rate than 4%, you're going to have to make up for that somewhere.
Do you feel like that second sentence kind of compensates for that a little bit? Like, I mean, that there's just not enough to get there.
Right. So,
divvy it up.
which is another reason why I feel like you need to put in language like a not to exceed, because we might not be able to afford 4% in some years.
Yeah.
And in order to stretch the override and make it last, you have to be conscious of that.
I also think that's why some of the language that you folks put in the front is really important, right? Because I think some people might look at that second paragraph cynically and say, oh, there's a carve out. They could just get everyone back together when things have calmed down and change it. But so much of this is going to be, a lot of this will be somewhat out of our control, right? Healthcare, things like that, broader economy. But if there are things within our control, like trying to adopt a more pro-growth posture, but then all those go down in flames at town meeting over the course of 18 months, at that point you do call these boards back together and say, this is not possible, right? Because these things all tie together. And if PASE is saying, hey, we spent a lot of time looking at this, and we think we need these growth things to help support the multi-year sustainability, and then all the growth things blow up, then we would have to revisit some of these things, because when you couldn't, we can't, this is not kind of an a la carte menu.
We know what the drivers of this issue now,
Right.
you know, what's causing this structural, well, we know, you've always known, but the larger committees had an opportunity to understand that, I think, through PACE's work. Jen?
I know this is not a likely scenario, but say there were a funding source that became available to a specific department for a specific need. The federal government suddenly opens the floodgates and says, you've got money and it has to be used towards this. If we're adhering to this cap, this self-imposed cap, does that essentially mean that a department that is receiving extra funding and is supposed to be using that for specific purposes is now subsidizing the opposite department?
I think that's a good question. I mean, so this is specific that it's the operating budget, right? And so if you were receiving a federal grant, that's not carried in the appropriated operating budget.
Okay, how about state? Say we
state-
succeed with, we're gonna get $300 per student.
Yeah.
Or Student Opportunity Act suddenly applies to us, and we've got a.
I think it's a fair question. I guess I don't know. And there's communities that have that, right? Like there's some communities that allocate out the ambulance revenue only to the fire department, right? But we treat everything as general fund revenue. And even if they went to $300 minimum aid, we're still going to have a hard time with 4%. So I don't know. I mean, I think a brand new specific thing is one thing, but just more adequately funding, and I'll make it a town thing so it doesn't sound unfair. If they start funding Chapter 90 better, right, which is an existing road program, I don't think that fundamentally means that the schools are then subsidizing the town, right? Or the town is subsidizing the schools versus if Chapter 70 is approved for a minimum aid. I think that's a little different than if they say, okay, we're passing a new funding stream entirely that has, that's for schools. But if it's subject to appropriation, it still has to kind of go through that the revenue stream. So it's a good thought. I just don't know how you account for it, right? Because would that stipulation then be anything over the statutory minimum of 30? Because that's the current one, right? The $30 per student.
Yeah.
And then what does that look like? Because if, let's say the net difference is $200,000. So the school budget's 4% plus 200,000. So then the 200, is the town budget just subtract 200? I don't know.
Doesn't the word insufficient in number 1 protect you from that conversation though? Because then you would not have a budget that is insufficient. You had an additional funding source that came in. It's not a lack of funding. It's additional funding that would not have to be allocated to that type of balance.
Well, I think Jen's question is highly technical because available revenues, we treat all revenue as general fund revenue.
Yeah.
Right, so Jen, I think your question is, what if a subsection of that general fund revenue got earmarked
gets
or
increased.
enhanced by
Yeah.
a state or federal government for the schools in particular?
Yeah.
Is there a way to carve that out? Maybe. I'm open to hearing. I just don't know what it would look like. And it's sort of like when very early in this process, we had some folks said, well, can we just do a menu override, right?
Yeah.
Some folks might only want the new revenue for the schools or only for the
Yeah.
town. It's like, well, but if we have a $3 million structural hole in the budget and we pass a $2 million increase for schools, we still have a deficit.
Right,
So,
right.
Um,
Yeah, and again, I'm thinking like if there were, again, truly something extreme, it would probably be the result of one of those exception categories that we talked about in the beginning, right? But
Sure.
ESSER, ARPA, things like that, right? I mean, that was, our budget increased significantly.
But those were through
Those
grants,
years
though,
through
right?
grants,
so,
yeah.
So I think we could put a caveat here that, well, I mean that this to me already covers that because this is about the general fund
Yeah, okay.
appropriation. So we're not, if the schools receive a grant, we're not going to net that out of your 4%,
Yeah.
right? And just like if we receive a grant for infrastructure or something, I don't think anyone here's expectation is we net that out of the 4%, right?
No, that's not, I
Okay.
think it's just.
So it's a good question.
Yeah.
I think I would be super happy to have
Yeah.
all of them back together if they
have that problem.
multiply
What do we
minimum aid
do
by
with
10.
this money?
I think that would be fair. And then again, if it was, so say it's a brand new thing statutorily, then it's not really our choice,
Yep.
right? If it was a whole new thing on top of the existing funding stream for schools and they said, okay, we're gonna make chapter 70B, that probably already exists, and it has to go to schools, then that has to go to schools.
Yeah, you have no choice in the matter. Yeah, that's a good point.
But it's
Question.
fair. It's a good question.
And then the second thing was exceptions for mandated services, and I think the focus of this was to recognize that there are just some things that happen that are, going to fall outside these budget caps. So we just take a look at that and see if there are any concerns there. Do you feel this is redundant again, or?
I have a question. What is a mandated program?
I was going to say the same thing.
School system's a mandated program.
Could you specify a new unfunded mandate? Or?
Such as no, but it says mandated programs or services. The school system is a mandated program, is it not?
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I don't think the intent here was to create.
Well, no, I understand that.
Yeah.
But I'm the joyful lawyer looking for my school system.
So just adding new
So
unfunded
would you say
before?
new unfunded mandates, like something that happens after this?
Isn't that in such as new legal requirements or regulatory mandates?
But that's an example. That's an example, but that doesn't preclude.
Existing.
I mean, special
Oh,
needs
yeah,
is a
yeah.
mandated program, right? It's
Yeah.
both federal and state.
Yeah, that was
Right?
my
And
concern here.
Schools
Absolutely.
themselves are mandated in the Constitution of Massachusetts. So they're mandated programs.
Didn't we have language originally in
I-
the draft? Because I had pulled language from mine that I had similarly, just with the schools in mind, had specific language in connection to special education and like the mandates that are required by law to meet the expectations. But again, I don't know if that is too nitpicky in this moment, if it would still qualify under the legal requirements.
If I recall, you even had specific percentages that
Yeah.
differed for those outside of this 4%.
But does the kind of mitigation plan not address that though?
That's what I'm wondering.
Right,
It
'cause
might just be redundant.
Yeah, because
to go that
it
nitpicky.
says like, okay, let's say your out-of-district transportation costs for the state set go up 15% this year, and there's just not enough time between you getting that information and balancing the budget for you to make it 4. But you have to file a plan that for the next year, what non-mandated thing are you going to cut to compensate? Like, does that get to it, Chris?
Well, the sentence goes on to say, will be exempt from paragraph 1. Will be exempt from the annual budget cap.
Yeah, so then it goes to say, should a department need something in excess of that cap to meet a mandatory requirement, it will be required to provide a mitigation plan outlining how they'll offset that cost.
I understand, but right there it says will be exempted from the annual budget cap.
So maybe we just need to
Period.
get rid of that clause, should be exempt, I mean, we're saying they shouldn't be, but they have to file a mitigation plan. It can't be under the 4%.
So just delete the first sentence so it says, should a department need to budget in excess of the cap to meet a mandatory requirement, they'll be required to.
Yeah, there you go.
By the next year. Is that fair?
That covers it.
Yeah.
Just that little, I've been burned before on the planning board by missing a word.
I'm sure that
Okay.
that will not happen at all with this.
Okay, so we'll just get rid of that. Where's the fire extinguisher? Yeah, so we'll just take out that first sentence.
Yep.
I think that's very good. And then should a department need, and then you have these mitigation plans. That's a good catch, Chris. Yeah. Anything else on that? Am I missing anything online, Mr. Helen?
Nada.
Okay, regionalization of services. I think we've all talked about the fact that we have taken such benefit from SEMRAC, and that we want ways to make sure that that continues to happen if possible. Is that adequate language there?
I think the language is adequate. I just wanted to ask the question, do you have any concrete examples of other regionalizations that could be gone towards outside of like a regional, I don't know if this exists actually, a regional police or fire department?
So other examples of regionalization, some things that we've started recently are certain types of health inspections that are required by state statute, where we work with a handful of other communities to have a single inspector shared among numerous communities, because it just wouldn't economically make sense to have one for ourselves. That's obviously a much smaller scale than SEMRAC. I think this ties to, SEMRAC itself is trying to expand by potentially merging with another full region. So, you see things with health, 911. I'm sure there can be additional opportunities. But no, I don't have like an existing, the next one right in front of me. I think, but again, this is kind of the importance of, if this is really where PACE feels, of having that line in the sand, because regionalization is not always something that people are excited about when it's happening, because it involves dissolving department. I mean,
You'll lose jobs in the
Unions aren't big fans.
No.
right. I mean, to regionalize dispatch, you need to dissolve departments into entire unions, right? And so and I'm not making light of that. That's a very hard thing to do, but we see the benefit of that. So again, just having a group that's as cross-sectional as this one say, no, we think that's worth exploring. It doesn't mean you just blindly dissolve all local services, but I think that's...
Weren't we sharing a veterans agent at one point with?
We were, yes,
Yeah.
and sometimes you go back.
Yeah, it's fluid, but.
Yeah, but I think this is also the economics, the reality of Prop 2.5 and what we're running into, and so many cities and towns are running into, is going to force... People ought to be doing this, but again, I think it helps for the committee to say, we think that this is worth doing, if that is what the committee thinks.
That was sort of where my question was going next, is that this seems like something that we know that this is something you've been investigating, right? We see the SEMRAC piece as that item. Do we need to codify it? The statement you just made at the end, I think that calls out the benefit here, so I think it's good.
Okay.
I think sometimes we have to assume that people are reading this don't know or aren't
That we've
aware
done,
of
yeah, that'd be
SEMRAC or aren't
Yeah,
aware of.
good
That's
point.
why it's good to, it may seem redundant to us, but it's good to call out when we can.
So I think we're on to the last section, section 5, protecting financial reserves and shielding bond ratings. And I think there might be some conversation around free cash reserves in particular.
I think this is a good section to leave in. This was something that I highly suggested in the last meeting, that we need to preserve this as best we can and not utilize.
Free cash, thank you.
Yeah, free cash.
Wendy and Connor, what?
How do you guys feel about that?
I feel like 15% is a low
Yeah,
percentage.
and
Yeah.
I think I might have written it, and
Because I mean,
the challenge is that free cash fluctuates. So 15% in one year might be a very different number than another.
right.
So we have existing financial policies that cap it at 50, but we know 50 is too much, because then that eats into our ability to fund capital of course, just because the policy says up to 50 doesn't mean you have to do it, but the trade-off that we have all made, in my opinion, eyes open, and we have certainly not hit the ball, and it comes up at town meeting regularly, is, well, sure, we could fund more cash capital, but we would be laying off, 6 or 7 positions immediately to do that. I think, if there's an override, you absolutely should not have a dollar of free cash or stabilization in that budget.
Which is that first sentence.
That first year,
first
right?
sentence,
That would make no sense. I think it's important, and I think it's consistent with PACE saying, okay, the problem is 8 million or 8.1, 7.3 on revenue, 800,000 on expenses or efficiencies, that 7.3 isn't entirely allocated out against increasing budgets, and that there's an amount that's specifically identified as like an override reserve for that first or second year to help stretch this.
You will absolutely need that.
You will need that, so that you don't immediately resort to either position cuts or free cash. I think if we are going to say 4 years, which is 26, 7, 8, and 9, I would feel more comfortable if it says through fiscal 29, because we know by fiscal 30 we are going to be having a hard time.
Okay.
Again, that's just my opinion. And
25?
I mean, it cuts both ways, but I suppose, so what does it say? If it's more than this, a mitigation plan? I mean, 25 would still be a substantial improvement.
Half of 50.
Well,
I'm leaning towards 40, but
but so what? We're gonna have an override and only improve by 10 and 50?
She's just telling
I'm
you
not
what the
saying
numbers are.
I'm just saying as the years go out, you're gonna need that money more. I'm not looking. I would not propose using 40% in year 2, but as you get to year 3 and year 4, you're going to need that. And if you've only got a certification of $2 million,
and you're talking a couple $100,000,
it's not a lot.
So at the risk of turning it into rocket science, we want to have it slide as the years go on, because I think one of the points, Jim, you put in there noted in the number 3, if necessary, the town may discontinue certain free cash capital to maintain, right? So it's kind of baked in. All of this would be subject to town meeting signing off on it. Wendy is right and is smarter than me when it comes to the budget, obviously. I just don't think you could actually say 40 as like you start. I think 0 in the first year, and then,
You just don't know what's going to come up.
I'm okay with that. I just think 15 is
How about
way
0,
too low.
25, 40 in 3 years?
That works for me.
So I think it's, so fiscal 26 is the 0,
Zero.
right? And then you've got 27, 28, and 29, so it's 4 years, so we need 4 numbers.
25, 40, 40?
Yeah.
Connor's thinking.
I
smell smoke.
You do 25, 35, 40, because then your point is, right, this is not it's impossible to go over. There's a mitigation plan that has to be discussed that details how to reduce reliance. But that mitigation plan is not saying, maybe I'm reading it wrong, it's not saying here's literally the cuts we're making. It's just, this is the plan that's being developed to reduce reliance.
I kind of listening to Wendy, I kind of feel like we're splitting hairs here, that this number is going to be inadequate, if the insurance inflation increases at 10%. We're
Do you just make it 40 in the fact that it will not exceed that? This is like, my driving instructor, when I took driving a million years ago, was like, the speed limit's the limit. You don't have to drive it all the time.
Oh,
You
I
can be
never
under it.
understood
So,
that.
but I just think if the only year there's a restriction is the very first one, and it says in fiscal 27 you don't exceed 40, then are you not basically inviting going to 40?
Bless you.
Bless you.
Well, how do you
Yeah,
like
that's what it is.
25 for 27?
I would be okay with 15% in year 2, but 3 and 4 I would go up to 40. I could live with 15% in year 2.
Yeah, and I think
Do we need to put anything further than the first line?
I guess
Can
I would ask you, Denise, and Jim, and other folks on the committee who hear from folks in the community who may be more adverse to the override altogether. I mean, how much of this level of specificity is essential?
Right.
That's a good point.
You were really concerned about this, Denise. What are you hearing from folks?
Well, I totally agree with Connor that we can't use free cash in the next fiscal operating budget at a minimum. I think that it does show some good faith if in that second year that we can be restrictive and then not specify anything further than that and just leave it open because we may need to have high or low swings.
So just state fiscal 26 will use
And I
0,
guess I'm going to propose that no free cash in fiscal 26 and in that second year not to exceed 15% and then leave it at that because we can't predict any more than the first 2 years. After that, it's just it's an it call.
Okay. How do you feel about that?
Once you start using it, it's going to be hard to stop.
Yeah, so Chris, go ahead.
If we're gonna put a limit on when we're, you know how we're like 4 and 5 for overrides, I think we need to dovetail that with whatever, what I'm put.
Have a full plan for those same year.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Just for the look.
So I hear that. On the flip side, the only reason we made it 19 years is because we've been using free cash. If we weren't, we would have needed an override 15 years ago. I mean, we needed one 10 years ago. Right, I mean, because that's, and this doesn't address stabilization, so then does that just mean we're saying, oh, we won't use any free cash, but in year 3, if the goal, like what's the more important goal? When I read a document like this, like the literal number one thing this committee is saying is not going for an override for 4 years. So if that's more important, then is it better to be doing layoffs in year 3, right? And not to be dramatic, but like that's we know, right? I mean, so I started exactly where you are. I'm just trying to talk through and hear what Wendy's point is and Denise's point of. So we're saying, outside of a disaster, we're going to try and get at least 4 years out of this override. We want to sustain services.
This group is going to end up contradicting themselves if we limit how free cash is used. This town's budget, I mean, we only survive on free cash. That's all there is to it. Like, when you do an override, that's great that year, but then the next year it goes in. Our budget model, it's not necessarily that it's based on it, but it's just a fact of life until something grossly changes with the town. And grossly could mean you lay off an obscene amount of people and we become desolate, or we get some kind of new funding or something like that, some kind of growth. But in the interim, which is the reality in which we live, we're essentially funding free cash with an override. I mean, not directly, but every year we're going to have to use it. That's the one thing that I have learned from this committee. So I just feel bad limiting you. I mean, putting limits on that just for the sake of optics I think it's a real slippery slope.
Could we, because we have it in the title that it's like the financial reserves and the bond rating. Can we kind of tie it into that, like that the amount used will not impact like our bond rating? Like, does that give us more flexibility?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and I think that's fair. I still think and I am limiting myself here. I think it's like at the absolute minimum, it just doesn't make sense in the first year if you're doing an override to rely.
Oh, agreed.
Oh, you can't.
I mean,
Yeah, you can't. Absolutely. Okay.
Agreed
I think
there,
we all
but
agree with
like
that.
That's like a slap.
we say that for like the first year, and if you wanted to even put something in there for the second year, but then after that, stipulating
All subsequent years will be
used like
with
no
this as the
more.
consideration.
The free cash that's used will not impact the bond. Like some kind of wording to that effect, so that because that's our priority, right? Is
Yeah, and to your point, like the flexibility is there.
I'm fine with that. I think that's a balanced approach.
I think it speaks to the concern you have about the optics of having free cash being used in an override year, 100%, right? You have some sort of ability to say, we're doing this to make sure we have as much sustained usage of this override.
Right.
Check. But then after that, we will revert might be the wrong word. We will continue to...
We have the existing policies, right?
Yeah, drive this to leveraging existing policies for that.
I'll say according to
ensure,
existing policies.
Yeah.
like high bond rating or something to that effect.
Yeah.
That we kind of meet both in the middle.
Yep, I
Yeah,
have
I
a
think
use in
that's fair.
subsequent years will not impact the bond rating according to existing policies. What about year 27 though? Did we make a decision on that?
I feel like we should say none in the first year and limit it in the second, and then thereafter it should be in accordance with existing.
What's the
policies.
limit for 27? 15 or 25? I've heard
20.
I would.
You do you.
I know. No, I mean, it really depends on how much is left over
Well, again, if there is a problem and you need
from
more,
the override that
there's a
can go
mitigation.
into like an override stabilization fund to be used, the next year to help offset things. If you don't have enough in that, then you're gonna probably need free cash in year 2. But I still would try to limit that because again, once you start using it.
So could we say
stop.
year 2 not to exceed a certain percentage?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out what that percentage
Yeah,
is.
What
right?
percentage would you be?
I'd almost be inclined to go back to like the 15% for year 2, but then after that, it really gets difficult.
Then we'll use
I think
that full years 27, 28, and subsequent years.
That's good.
Use will not impact the bond rating according to existing policies. Okay, we'll try that.
So the one thing I want to flag there, much like we all did on the operating side, is just for folks to, and I know this group does, but for anyone watching, I'm comfortable with that, but that much like, why not 8 instead of 7.3? One of the questions that comes up is like, why aren't you doing cruisers with like a recurring revenue source or school laptops?
Oh, yeah.
And just the constraints we're voluntarily agreeing to are going to make that extremely hard. It doesn't mean we won't fund those things. We're probably still going to have to use free cash, and I think everyone here knows that, right? We're not going from we have a major problem, we're trying to fix a major problem, and go for gold and do everything exactly like the AAA bond rating way, because that would just cost. We would have to the override would need to be 10+ million, right? But I just want to flag that. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that comment. Any comments on the health insurance and OPEB liabilities?
I have difficulty with the word unsustainable. The town will address the unsustainable growth of healthcare and other so on and so forth. What does unsustainable mean? Is it
Keeps
okay
going up
if it is
10% every
sustainable,
year.
then you're not going to do these things?
It has to do with the inflation.
And then the unsustainable growth, you mean the growth in cost?
How about the inflationary growth? Is that better? That
Just
makes
put increases in.
the inflationary growth, okay. Thank you, Chris. Inflationary growth of healthcare and other employee benefits liabilities. Any?
Discussed the 2 bullets here in this committee before, right? I think we've delivered.
We've mentioned them.
Yeah.
Yep, I see them. There too. Any comments on those?
Well, the first one the select board did. Well, no, I think to the point to Jim's point, there's a lot, we should expect folks to know that. I think employees are obviously, we're all aware, and none of us are excited. I'm not saying that as like a ding of a select board. I'm the one who recommended it, and not happily. But I think this ties into we are in a budget position right now where we're asking voters to consider kind of universally painful choices. And I think sometimes a question folks ask back is like, well, what is the town doing, or what are the schools doing? Like, what are you putting on the table as well? And that's one of those options. I can appreciate, so like just reading that, does that mean more? Does that mean existing? Because that's a very different conversation than future. Like, so the board adopted a descending plan for future retirees. So I don't mean to turn into rocket science. What I wouldn't want is for folks like, so we have an insurance advisory committee of all of our unions and representatives from retirement board who we're speaking with about this subject, and see this says retiree. Does that mean everyone? Are you doing that? So I don't know, there's a way to be somewhat more general. I don't know.
Adjusting healthcare premium contributions? I don't know if that's what we're getting.
Well, the second one then addresses the fact that you cannot do that unilaterally, right? That's a bargaining thing.
Adjusting, maybe assessing.
Yeah, I think assessing is fair. And then someone might say, well, that means they'll never do it. And we say, well, they did, right? So maybe that's a little bit more general.
So changing the word adjusting to assessing?
And unless folks think I'm being too squishy.
No, it's fine.
That's what we
I don't know,
usually
Chris,
say.
don't you think I'm being appropriately sensitive to that, given?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That sounds good.
But this is for retirees, right?
Uh-huh.
Are they in a union? Do they do any?
Retirees have absolutely no protection when it comes to their health insurance splits.
So you can use adjusting.
Yes, so this is what I'm trying to talk about. The sensitivity is that can and should are different, right? And
Yes,
so Chris is making a point that under state law in Massachusetts, active employees in a municipality have bargaining units. You can't unilaterally change benefits without negotiating it, right? Towns do not need to negotiate with retirees. There is, I think, a very fair sensitivity to folks who are, it's one thing to talk about making forward-facing adjustments for future retirees. I think that's very different than if you just say adjust retiree premium. If I'm an existing retiree of this community, I'm going to see that and say, wait, are my premiums going to get doubled?
So maybe
Legally, it's
adjusting future.
Assessing future retirees?
So I think so the select board under the law can, regardless of what this document says, can make changes at any time. They're obviously reticent to do that willy-nilly because that could have, it's somebody on a pension is on a fixed income, right? I think assessing is broad enough. Chris, I don't know if you agree or you think that still like kind of makes it sound like we're going farther than what's already going on.
Because we're in the GIC, every 2 years we reassess anyways.
We
cost it out.
Yeah, we go to market to see if we can shift to a different provider, if there's a better carrier that can get us better premiums for employees, but then automatically, therefore, the town budget. I think you could probably make this whole thing more general in saying assessing premium contribution rates, right? And adopting other reforms such as the ARC, right, the annual required contribution. Because collective bargaining, that has to be the select board and or the school committee and the unions. And again, I probably sound like I'm betting myself into a pretzel here because the select board has already made some adjustments. I don't know. I keep looking at Chris because he's on this insurance committee.
No, I think it's being worded appropriately. It's yet another thing for people who are watching that is very sensitive, that is not taken lightly. And that board is actively trying to think of ways to be sustainable, just like this committee, as far as protecting our retirees and their benefits as well, including, I don't want to speak out of school just yet, but they're investigating other ways to make that sustainable. But, you know, they are aware that, unfortunately, I don't think the public exactly gets how we do insurance in Easton, and we're part of a kind of a coalition thing. So, and the one thing about insurance, every union is bound by the same split and everything now. So it's the one thing that we're all together on. Yeah.
So you think the word retiree should remain in there or not be in there? Connor just suggested maybe assessing.
I mean, part of it too, in the interest of being succinct and not being super laser prescriptive, is just perhaps assessing premium contribution rates and other reforms such as annual required contributions where possible to reduce long-term liability. You can just get rid of the second bullet.
And this may be persnickety.
Why stop now?
The contributions don't actually reduce the liability, right? Like the liability is a liability. There's a gap between our funding available to cover the liability, but liability is a liability.
So would you say unfunded liability?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's good.
Are you on the audit committee?
Do I do pensions for a living?
So to reduce.
No, that's a fair point. Yeah, you're right. Liability is a liability.
It is the unfunded liability.
Yep.
To reduce unfunded long-term liability? Is that
Long-term unfunded
Yeah.
liability.
long-term? Thank
That's the
you.
phrase we want
Unfunded
there.
liability. Okay.
So is that fair? It's that one bullet of assessing premium contribution rates and other reforms such as annual required contributions to the OPEB trust fund where possible to reduce long-term unfunded liability.
Got it. And get rid of the next bullet.
Yeah, I would.
Is everybody okay with that?
I think that's happening anyway.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know, anybody need to
All right.
clarify it.
So,
Oops,
but
sorry.
engaging doesn't mean, it just means talking about, right?
Well, it says engage in bargaining, but I'm of the opinion, and it's happening.
Yeah, it's already being done.
And I'm of the opinion that assessing the premium contribution rates without saying active versus retiree is a broad umbrella of all of it. I don't know.
Takes care of both.
No, I agree with you.
We're removing the word retiree as well.
Yes, assessing premium contribution rates and other reforms such as annual required contributions to the OPEC. I've got
Yeah. You could just make that one sentence and not even a bullet.
That's a good point, because that's the only thing under there.
Yeah.
So get rid of the semicolon and the colon and put it up there.
So you're just gonna do the first bullet.
Correct.
With a little modification.
Yeah, a little broader.
We okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, capital asset funding.
Does this feel duplicative of what we're already trying to do?
So we do this, but
Right.
again, I don't think it's a bad thing to read.
Okay.
I don't expect. I mean, we're having an important debate on whether this single one document is too detailed and long, and so I don't want to assume that someone's going to go then read the 25-page financial management policies, right?
Good point. Yeah, you got me there.
I'm not trying
Yeah.
to persnickety. So I think restating that.
Yeah, no, I like that idea. That makes sense. I just wasn't sure if it was just, are we restating the obvious of what we're already doing?
Any comments on that capital?
Well, it makes it more clear for those people like myself who don't understand free cash from the other one, so.
So it's valuable to have.
For the general population, I think that makes the most sense of anything I've read.
Oh, boy, we're in trouble.
Wait till you read
So
the
I'm hearing
conclusion.
delete every single other thing.
No, I'm just saying that this is written succinctly and it's to the point.
It's a good summary.
And it's
Yep.
well done, so.
And then I think the conclusion is fairly self-explanatory. The only other piece, sorry to bring this up, that folks have commented on is, do we need a measurement here? And can the measurement come from something as simple as when the budget memos, messages are put forward from the town and the school, that they make some comment with them about how they align to these goals and details? Does that take care of it?
Jen, I'll look to you for schools.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just add a little measurement at the bottom and don't worry, I have that written down someplace too, but a little measurement thing, and we'll just tie it to the budget messages and a comment that goes through
Would
that.
be, and when the annual budget is filed, the TA and superintendent will describe how the budget advances the goals of this pledge.
I did have one suggested edit. The word ensure always just catches me whenever I see it, and that may just be related to my work, but maybe designed to promote the fiscal health and long-term
Oh, thank you.
sustainability.
Yes.
I think promote's a good word.
I agree with you 100% there.
Yeah, and sure means it's definitely.
Yeah, we can't ensure anything.
Okay. That was a lot of work. Connor, you thinking?
Yeah, I just want to make sure the committee, I would suggest, and I would want to make sure the committee is comfortable with, not to give you, Marissa and Jim, more work, but you did a good job on this, and there's got to be some cleanup from this.
Oh, yes.
That basically between now and Monday, that you're all comfortable with the same folks who wrote most of this, and then a technical review with myself and Dr. Cabral to finalize it, send it out to this group ahead of it going to the select board. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. And produce this along with the summary at the same time, or is the summary not as important for Monday? I don't.
You mean the summary as far as
The
like
short.
what, for the public?
Yes.
I don't think there's enough hours in the day for.
I think that's in
you
post.
to- I think.
If we get this done,
It's the three of you, so I won't answer for you.
Oh, well, I just wanted to be sure that wasn't your expectation.
No,
So-
I mean, I think this is
We'll
awesome,
just do
and
this
I
document.
genuinely appreciate how much the three of
Okay.
you put into it.
Is everyone comfortable with,
Yeah, I have
Jen?
a question. Would the intent be to have the school committee vote on this at our March 27th meeting? If so, I just need to make sure that I add it to the agenda.
Actually, as to become the signatory then?
Yeah,
I mean,
what were you planning on for the timing for that?
Um,
Or does it need to,
so-
what's the process you're envisioning for the boards?
So, I didn't plan on whatever date for the school. I didn't want to be presumptuous.
Yeah.
So, if that works for the school committee, that's great. I would expect. Actually,
I thought this was going to be
voted on
on Wednesday. Like I'm
for finance committee.
I'm submitting.
So
a
it's being presented
agenda.
to the select board Monday.
Yeah, so they're Monday,
So,
the
but you're
finance
actually making me realize I should
Wednesdays.
probably make that specific on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
So
gonna
School
ask.
that
committee
it's not
will
only a
be,
presentation, but a possible vote to adopt that pledge.
yeah, so school committee could go Thursday and I could add it
finance
to the
committee's
agenda as a
Wednesday.
possible
Yeah.
vote.
324 for the select
come to my
board,
meeting?
326 for finance
Come
committee,
hang out at my
327
meeting?
for school.
That would be
You're going to be in here?
That's
super
wonderful.
efficient.
Wow,
if we
wouldn't that
did
be
it.
great? Wrap it all up next week.
Let's save you a chair. Hang
Yeah,
out.
challenge
I'm not coming
accepted.
to yours.
Jim, I
Jen,
hope
would you be
feel better.
comfortable with that?
I think if we can get the draft to the school committee several days ahead of time, yeah, I
Our
mean,
goal is having it ready for Monday, so.
right, yeah.
Yeah, you have
So,
to have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm down with that. So
No Aruba vacations for, well,
Because I
unless
would
we
like
went
it
there
to
and
be
worked,
done
it might
before
make you
our
feel
hearing.
better.
bring a laptop to
Just the
Aruba. What are you
following
talking
week,
about?
so, yeah.
I would agree with you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we still need to take a vote though tonight, right? That, the thing says deliberate on some required by, to vote and adopt all outstanding recommendations. So I guess what we'd be voting on is this document with the changes discussed tonight.
Motion to adopt the pledge as amended.
Second.
All in favor? We'll have to do
Oh,
a
we
roll
have to
call
get
vote.
a roll
Roll call
call.
vote. Chris?
Yes.
Millette?
But yes, Susie, yes.
Donahue, yes.
Hamilton, yes.
Reed, yes.
Nightingale, yes.
Mills, yes.
Star, yes?
Helen, yes.
Who's online there?
Denise, Flynn, and
Yes.
Dr. Well.
Higgins, yes.
Cabral, yes. Byers, yes.
There you go.
Well, thank you. Thank you, all three of you. Okay, great work. And this will be really quick. The next item was pay schedule through the annual town meeting. Right now, we know that we have the select board presentation we mentioned on the 24th. You've also heard that there's a financial committee meeting and a school committee meeting, so those are also things that could be on your calendar if possible. The next meeting I have on my calendar for this board is 4/9 that we set last time. Does everybody still have that? Which hopefully is just sort of a wrap up and little review about engagement and really our work product is pretty much finished.
Are we-
Although,
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Are we
Yeah.
trying to do one more?
That's what I was just gonna say, although
Sorry.
Connor did mention this one more open house, which I don't think we have time to plan for tonight, so are you
I
okay with
agree
that?
with you. I think if PACE is getting back together on the 9th, by then a lot is going to happen in town between now and the 9th. I'm giving an update to the town budget Monday night. The school committee has their budget hearing on April 3rd. We have these three meetings you already cited. So I think on it by April 9th, PACE will be rested enough to decide what we want to do. I frankly do not think there's time to do anything more than one additional major event, and even that's going to be a push, but I think it's worth exploring.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think
wait
if
till the
we-
9th and we'll see where
Yeah, I think realistically, even if we weren't waiting till the 9th, with the school budget hearings, the meetings that are already happening, the school vacation, the election,
That's
then
the other thing I was
the
gonna
balanced
mention, yeah.
budget hearing, which will be April 29th.
Oh, yeah.
I think the opportunity is really, it's between April 29th and town meeting.
Right, so the
We
other
have a PACE
dates,
meeting on the 7th scheduled right now.
the 7th?
We do. That's what at least I have May 7th. I have a PACE meeting on my calendar.
Oh, May 7th. Oh,
So
yeah,
if
yeah.
there's like, if you wanted to do something that's already technically.
Instead of
That's a
the
great
PACE
thought,
meeting.
I don't know if that's too late, but
I don't think it's.
maybe
No, I
May
think it's
7th.
perfect.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Right in, it's right
Selfishly,
in
I wouldn't want it to be the week before town meeting because we're handling a
Right.
lot of logistics and
I think
things
that's
for the town
maybe
meeting
why
itself, but
we did that. We did that too. And then
yeah.
you also have the, as Connor just mentioned, the town elections on 4/26, and we still don't have a date for a hopeful ballot vote, so that's still
yeah,
pending.
the discussion about that will be on the select board's agenda Monday night as well.
Great, great.
If anyone needs it, the FinCom is meeting tentatively. I'm going to put the agenda together tonight, but we should be meeting next Wednesday, the 26th here. So if anyone wants to come hang out with me more, and 9 of my closest friends, you're just
Connor's-
consider your invite.
The meeting Monday starts at 6.
Yes.
With PACE slated to present around 6:45, Connor
I'll
first,
be getting
which,
a budget update at 6:30.
yeah, which I think is kind of nice, we'll sort of follow, so hopefully you can join us here. And that is all that I have.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Chris? Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Thank you. Donahue, yes.
Hamilton, yes.
Reed, yeah. Sorry, I was already like, oh, I'm turning my mic off.
Mills, yes.
Star, yes.
Ellen, yes.
Online, Higgins,
Higgins, yes.
Byers,
Yes.
Cabral.
Cabral, yes.
Thank you and good evening all.
Thank you.